When a billionaire CEO walked into a rundown mechanic shop and begged a grease-stained stranger to be her boyfriend for one weekend, everyone assumed she was crazy. When that mechanic defended her against her own family without knowing who she really was, they realized something far more dangerous was happening. Two people were about to discover that the greatest wealth in the world has nothing to do with money. If you want to see how a simple act of kindness can change two lives forever, stay with me until the very end. And don't forget to hit that like button and comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels across the world. The fluorescent lights in Hale's auto repair flickered like they'd been threatening to die for the past decade. Lucas Hale didn't bother looking up from the engine he was elbow deep in. A 1998 Honda Civic that had seen better years and probably better mechanics. The shop smelled like motor oil, old coffee, and the kind of honest work that left your hands permanently stained no matter how hard you scrubbed. It was nearly 6 in the evening on a Friday, and Lucas had already turned away two customers who wanted their oil changed real quick. There was no such thing as real quick in his world. There was only done right or not done at all. The bell above the door chimed. Lucas sighed, wiping his hands on a rag that was beyond saving. "We're closing in 20 minutes, he called out, still not looking up. "If it's not an emergency, you'll have to come back Monday." Silence. Then a voice, female, controlled, the kind of voice that was used to boardrooms, not grease pits. "I'm not here about a car." That made Lucas look up. The woman standing in his doorway didn't belong there. That was the first thing anyone would notice. She wore a cream-colored blazer that probably cost more than his monthly rent, dark jeans that fit like they'd been tailored specifically for her, and heels that clicked against the oil-stained concrete like a countdown timer. Her hair was pulled back in a way that looked effortless but probably took 20 minutes to perfect. She held herself like armor, shoulders back, chin up, eyes steady. But Lucas had learned a long time ago to look past what people showed you and see what they were hiding. Her hands were shaking, just slightly. The kind of tremor you'd only notice if you were paying attention. And her eyes, dark brown, sharp, held something he recognized all too well: desperation. "Then, what are you here for?" Lucas straightened up, tossing the rag onto his workbench. He was tall, just over 6 feet, with the kind of build that came from actual labor rather than gym memberships. His dark hair was perpetually messy, his face unshaven, and his clothes carried the evidence of a long day's work. He looked exactly like what he was, a man who fixed things for a living and didn't apologize for it. The woman took a breath, and Lucas watched her make a decision. Whatever she was about to say, she'd been rehearsing it. "My name is Madeline Cross," she said, "and I need to hire you for the weekend." Lucas raised an eyebrow. "Lady, I don't know what kind of mechanic work you think requires a weekend, but I don't need a mechanic." Her voice cut through his sentence cleanly. "I need a boyfriend." The shop fell silent except for the hum of the dying fluorescent lights. Lucas stared at her. Then he laughed. A short, sharp sound with no humor in it. "You've got the wrong place. Whatever this is, I'm not interested." "Please." The word came out softer than she'd intended, and Lucas saw her flinch at her own vulnerability. "Just hear me out. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking." Something in her voice made him pause. He'd heard a lot of things in his 34 years, lies, promises, threats, pleas, but there was a quality to her desperation that felt different. Honest, maybe. Or maybe just broken in a way he understood. 5 minutes, he said finally, crossing his arms. "Talk." Madeline Cross took another breath, and Lucas watched her gather herself like someone preparing for battle. "I come from a family that measures worth in dollars and legacy," she began. "Every year we have a gathering, 3 days at the family estate, where everyone brings their partners, shows off their achievements, and quietly tears each other apart under the guise of civility. I've attended alone for the past 5 years. Every single time, I'm reminded that despite everything I've accomplished professionally, I'm considered incomplete because I don't have someone standing next to me." Lucas didn't say anything. He just listened. "This year, I can't do it alone again," Madeline continued, and now her voice was steadier, like she was presenting a business case. "I don't need romance. I don't need affection. I just need someone who can stand in a room full of people who will judge every word, every gesture, every breath, and not crumble under it. Someone real." "And you think I'm that someone?" Lucas kept his voice neutral. "You don't know anything about me." Actually, I do. That made Lucas go still. Madeline reached into her purse, an expensive leather thing that probably had its own security system, and pulled out her phone. A few taps later, she turned the screen toward him. Lucas recognized the video immediately. It had been taken 3 months ago, on a scorching afternoon when he'd been driving back from picking up parts. An elderly couple stranded on the side of the highway with a smoking engine and no cell service. He'd pulled over, spent 2 hours getting their car running again, and refused payment despite the old man's insistence. Someone had filmed the whole thing, posted it online. It had gone viral, millions of views, thousands of comments about faith in humanity restored and real heroes don't wear capes. Lucas had ignored all of it. "I saw this video the day it was posted," Madeline said quietly, putting her phone away. "I watched you spend 2 hours in 100-degree heat helping complete strangers. I watched you refuse money from people who clearly didn't have much to give. I watched you treat them with dignity and kindness when you had absolutely nothing to gain from it." She met his eyes. "That's why I'm here. Because I need someone who understands that kindness isn't a transaction. Someone who won't be impressed by wealth or intimidated by my family's status. Someone who will just be real." Lucas studied her for a long moment. The shop was quiet except for the buzz of those dying lights and the distant sound of traffic on the street outside. "What's the catch?" he asked finally. "No catch. I'll pay you." "No." The word came out harder than he'd intended. "If I do this, and that's a big if, it's not for money." Madeline blinked. "I don't understand." "I don't need your money," Lucas said flatly. "I've got enough to pay my bills and keep this place running. That's sufficient. If I agree to this, it's because I choose to, not because you paid me to." For the first time since she'd walked into his shop, Madeline Cross looked genuinely surprised. "Why would you choose to?" Lucas considered the question. Why would he? He had a simple life: work, sleep, the occasional beer with the guys who ran the body shop down the street. He kept his head down, his hands busy, and his heart carefully locked away where it couldn't be damaged again. Getting involved in some wealthy woman's family drama was the exact opposite of simple, but there was something in her eyes, something that reminded him of the way he'd felt after Sarah died, that specific kind of loneliness that came from being surrounded by people who looked at you but never actually saw you. "Because," he said slowly, "I think you're telling the truth, and I think you actually need help, not hired help. There's a difference." Madeline's armor cracked just slightly. "So you'll do it?" "One condition," Lucas said. "If at any point during this weekend I think you're playing me, using me for some game I don't understand, or putting on a show for people who don't matter, I walk. No explanation, no second chances. I just leave. That's fair?" "And no money," Lucas repeated. "Not a dollar. This isn't business." "Then what is it?" Lucas picked up his rag again, more out of habit than need. "I guess we'll find out. When's this thing happening?" "Next weekend, Friday through Sunday. The estate is about 2 hours north of here, in wine country." "Of course it is," Lucas muttered. Then louder. "Fine. I'll need your number to coordinate details." They exchanged information, and Lucas found himself looking at a contact that simply read Madeline Cross with a local area code. No company name, no title, just a name. "Thank you," Madeline said, and the relief in her voice was palpable. "You have no idea what this means to me." "Probably not," Lucas agreed, "but I'm starting to get the picture." Madeline turned to leave, then paused at the door. "That couple you helped on the highway, did you ever find out what happened to them?" Lucas shrugged. "Never asked. Wasn't helping them, so I'd get a story out of it." Madeline smiled, a real smile this time, not the polished version she'd walked in with. "No, I don't suppose you were." After she left, Lucas stood in his empty shop for a long time, staring at the phone in his hand. The smart thing would be to text her right now and cancel. Whatever mess she was walking into, it wasn't his problem. He had his own ghosts to manage, his own wounds that still hadn't fully healed. But he didn't cancel. Instead, he went back to the Honda Civic, finished the job he'd started, and tried not to think about cream-colored blazers and eyes that held too much loneliness for one person to carry alone. Well, The week passed in a blur of oil changes, brake repairs, and the steady rhythm of work that had defined Lucas's life for the past 6 years. He didn't hear from Madeline again until Thursday evening when his phone buzzed with a text. Madeline Cross. Picking you up tomorrow at 3 p.m. Pack business casual clothes for dinners, something comfortable for daytime. The family dresses for evening meals. Lucas looked down at his phone, then at his closet. A collection of jeans, work shirts, and exactly 2 button-downs he kept for occasions that required looking slightly less like a mechanic. He texted back, "Define business casual." Madeline Cross. "Do you own a blazer?" Lucas. "No." Madeline Cross. "I'll handle it. What's your size?" Lucas. "I can buy my own clothes." Madeline Cross. "I know you can, but you said no money for the arrangement. You didn't say no practical necessities. What's your size?" Lucas sighed. The woman had a point, even if it annoyed him. Lucas. 44 long, 34 by 34 pants. Don't go crazy. Madeline Cross. "I'll try to restrain myself. See you tomorrow." The next day, at exactly 3 in the afternoon, a black Mercedes SUV pulled up in front of Hale's Auto Repair. Lucas had already locked up, changed into clean jeans and a navy Henley, and thrown a duffel bag together with what he hoped would pass for appropriate weekend attire. Madeline stepped out of the driver's seat, and Lucas did a double take. Gone was the boardroom armor. She wore dark jeans, a soft gray sweater, and ankle boots. Her hair was down, falling in waves past her shoulders. She looked younger, more real. "You look different," Lucas said before he could stop himself. "So do you," Madeline replied, eyeing his clean clothes. "I wasn't sure you owned anything without grease stains." "I have layers," Lucas said dryly, tossing his bag in the back seat. The drive north was quiet at first. Madeline navigated through city traffic with the kind of precision that spoke to someone who'd made this drive many times before. Lucas watched the landscape change from urban sprawl to suburban neighborhoods to rolling hills covered in vineyards. "So," he said finally, breaking the silence, "you gonna tell me what I'm walking into, or are we doing this blind?" Madeline's hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel. "My family is complicated. Most families are. Not like this." She took a breath. "My father built a real estate empire from nothing. By the time I was born, we had more money than we could spend in 10 lifetimes. My mother came from old money, the kind where your last name matters more than anything you actually do. Together, they created this expectation machine." Lucas listened without interrupting. "I have 2 siblings," Madeline continued. "My older brother Richard runs the West Coast operations of my father's company. He's married to a woman whose family owns half the commercial properties in San Francisco. They have 3 perfect children and a perfect life, at least on paper." "And your other sibling?" "My younger sister, Victoria. She married into European aristocracy, an actual count, if you can believe it. They split their time between Monaco and Switzerland. She specializes in making everyone else feel inadequate by simply existing." "Sounds delightful," Lucas said. "And your parents?" "My father will assess you like a business acquisition. My mother will smile while cataloging every flaw. They won't be outright cruel. That would be gauche. But they'll make their opinions known in ways that feel like compliments until you really think about what they said." Lucas processed this. "And where do you fit in this picture?" Madeline was quiet for a moment. "I'm the one who disappointed everyone by choosing the wrong kind of success." "The wrong kind?" "I run my own company," Madeline said. "Technology consulting for mid-sized businesses. We help companies streamline their operations, implement better systems, scale efficiently. It's successful. We're profitable, growing, making a real difference for our clients." But I'm not building a dynasty. I'm not married into power. I'm not producing the next generation of the Cross family legacy." Her voice had gone flat. "I'm just Madeline, who works too hard at something they don't understand and comes to family gatherings alone, which is apparently the worst crime of all." Lucas studied her profile as she drove. "You said you've done this alone for 5 years. What changed?" Madeline's jaw tightened. "Last year, my mother pulled me aside after dinner. She told me she was worried about me, that a woman in her 30s without a partner was either hiding something or broken. She suggested I see someone, a therapist, to work through whatever trauma was preventing me from forming normal attachments. Jesus. I told her I didn't need therapy to explain why I hadn't found someone worth my time. She said that was exactly the kind of defensive response that proved her point. Madeline's laugh was bitter. So this year, I decided I was done being their cautionary tale. I'm bringing someone real, who won't be impressed by the money or the name or the whole performance. Someone who will just exist as himself and remind me that there are people in the world who measure worth differently. Lucas was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You know, this is just going to create more questions, right? They're going to want to know where you met me, what I do, why you chose me. You're trading one kind of scrutiny for another." "I know," Madeline said, "but at least this scrutiny is on my terms. I chose you. Not because you fit some checklist or because our families would merge well or because you'd look good in Christmas card photos. I chose you because you helped strangers on a highway in 100-degree heat and wouldn't take their money. That means something to me, even if it won't mean anything to them." Lucas found himself respecting her more than he'd expected to. This wasn't about revenge or proving a point. It was about survival, about making it through one more weekend in a world that had never quite made space for who she actually was. "All right," he said, "then let's get our story straight. Where did we meet?" Madeline glanced at him, and for the first time since they'd started driving, she smiled. "Actually, we can tell them the truth. That video of you helping that couple? It went viral enough that saying I saw it and tracked you down isn't unbelievable. We can say I brought my car in for service, we got to talking, and it developed from there. How long have we supposedly been together?" 3 months. Long enough to be serious, not so long that they'll question why they haven't heard about you before. Lucas nodded. "What else do I need to know?" For the next hour, as vineyards rolled past the windows and the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Madeline briefed him on her family's social dynamics. She told him about her father's obsession with legacy and expansion, about her mother's suffocating concern disguised as care, about Richard's competitive streak, and Victoria's casual cruelty dressed up as sophistication. She told him about the family dinners where every conversation was a negotiation, about the way they kept score of achievements and failures, about the unspoken rule that vulnerability was weakness and weakness was unforgivable. And as Lucas listened, he began to understand why this woman had walked into his shop looking for help. She wasn't running from her family's wealth or status. She was running from their emptiness. "One more thing," Madeline said as they turned off the highway onto a smaller road lined with oak trees. "My family doesn't know what I do for a living. Not really. They know I run a company, but they think it's small, cute, a hobby that keeps me busy." "Is it?" "We did $42 million in revenue last year," Madeline said quietly. "We employ 67 people. We've transformed operations for over 200 companies. But I don't talk about it at family gatherings because the moment I do, my father will want to acquire it, Richard will want to compete with it, and my mother will find some way to turn my success into evidence of my inability to balance work and personal life." Lucas let out a low whistle. "You're not just successful, you're legitimately successful. Does that change things? Should it?" Madeline looked at him, really looked at him. "For most people, yes." "Good thing I'm not most people," Lucas said. They drove in comfortable silence after that, until the road began to climb into hills that were manicured rather than wild. The vineyards here were pristine, the fences decorative, the estates visible in the distance looking more like hotels than homes. Finally, Madeline turned through a gate that opened automatically at their approach. The driveway was lined with Italian cypress trees, leading to a house that made Lucas bite back a curse. It wasn't a house. It was an estate. Sprawling stone and glass that looked like it had been airlifted from Tuscany and planted in Northern California wine country. The main structure was 3 stories of elegant architecture, with wings extending on either side and terraced gardens visible in the fading light. "Home sweet home," Madeline said, and the irony in her voice was thick enough to touch. As they pulled up to the circular driveway, Lucas saw other vehicles already parked, a Bentley, a Range Rover, a Tesla that probably cost more than his entire shop. Through the massive windows, he could see people moving around inside, elegant figures in expensive clothes, preparing for whatever performance the weekend required. Madeline put the car in park and sat there for a moment, her hands still on the steering wheel. "Last chance to run," she said quietly. Lucas looked at the house, then at her. "You running?" "I don't have that option." "Then neither do I," Lucas said. He reached for his door handle, then paused. "Hey, Madeline." She turned to look at him. "Whatever happens in there," Lucas said, "remember that you asked me here because you wanted someone real. So that's what I'm going to be, real, myself. If that embarrasses you or doesn't fit what they expect, that's not my problem. Got it?" For a moment, Madeline just stared at him. Then something in her expression softened. Not relief exactly, but something close to it. "Got it," she said. They got out of the car just as the front door opened. A woman emerged, early 60s, perfectly coiffed, wearing cream-colored slacks and a silk blouse that probably cost what Lucas made in a month. Her smile was warm and welcoming right up until her eyes landed on Lucas. Then the smile became something else entirely, more calculation than greeting. "Madeline, darling," the woman said, moving down the steps with practiced grace. "You made excellent time." "Traffic was light," Madeline replied, and Lucas heard her voice shift, becoming more formal, more careful. "Mother, this is Lucas Hale. Lucas, this is my mother, Catherine Cross." Lucas extended his hand. "Mrs. Cross, thank you for having me." Catherine took his hand. Her grip was firm but brief, her skin soft in a way that spoke to expensive lotions and a life free from manual labor. "How lovely to meet you, Lucas. Madeline has told us absolutely nothing about you, which means we get the pleasure of discovering you fresh." The words were friendly. The tone was not. "I'm an open book," Lucas said easily. "Not much mystery to uncover." "Oh, I doubt that," Catherine replied, her smile never quite reaching her eyes. "Everyone has mysteries. The question is whether they're interesting ones." Before Lucas could respond, a man appeared in the doorway. Tall, silver-haired, with the kind of presence that came from decades of commanding rooms full of people who wanted something from him. "Madeline," he said, his voice deep and measured, "and this must be the mysterious boyfriend we've heard so little about." "Father," Madeline said, "this is Lucas Hale. Lucas, my father, Robert Cross." Robert descended the steps with the confidence of someone who'd never questioned his right to any space he occupied. His handshake was firm, a test, Lucas realized. Seeing how hard Lucas would squeeze back, Lucas matched it exactly, not competing, not yielding, equal. Robert's eyebrow rose slightly. "Firm grip, that's good, shows character." "Or just that I work with my hands," Lucas said. "And what is it you do, exactly?" "I'm a mechanic. I own an auto repair shop in the city." The silence that followed was deafening. Catherine's smile froze in place. Robert's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, maybe, or disappointment. From inside the house, Lucas heard someone laugh, the sound cutting off abruptly, as if they'd been shushed. "A mechanic," Robert repeated slowly, as if testing the word. "How practical." "Someone has to keep people's cars running," Lucas said evenly. "Indeed," Catherine chimed in, her voice bright in a way that felt dangerous. "How wonderfully down to earth. Madeline, you've always had such an interesting way of surprising us." Madeline's jaw tightened, but before she could respond, another voice cut through the tension. "Well, well, our baby sister actually brought someone. I didn't think this day would ever come." A man emerged from the house, mid-40s, expensively dressed in slacks and a cashmere sweater, with dark hair going distinguished at the temples. Behind him came a woman who looked like she'd stepped out of a society magazine, and 3 children who ranged from about 8 to 14, all dressed like they were heading to a country club. "Richard," Madeline said, her voice carefully neutral. "Lucas, this is my brother Richard, his wife Patricia, and their children." Richard looked Lucas up and down with the kind of assessment that reduced a person to their market value. "A mechanic. How refreshingly blue-collar. Tell me, Lucas, where exactly did you two meet?" "At my shop," Lucas said simply. "Madeline brought her car in. We got to talking." How romantic, Patricia said, and her smile was sharp enough to cut glass. Car trouble leading to love, like something out of a movie. Life's stranger than fiction sometimes, Lucas replied. Indeed it is, came another voice, this one carrying a faint European accent. A woman descended the main staircase, visible through the open door, younger than Richard, older than Madeline, with the kind of beauty that came from expensive maintenance and genetic luck. I'm Victoria, the sister who made the sensible choice of marrying well rather than working herself to exhaustion. Victoria, Madeline said, warning in her voice. What? I'm just being honest. Victoria air-kissed Madeline's cheeks without actually making contact. And you must be the famous Lucas. My goodness, Maddie, he's even more rugged than I imagined. Very authentic. The way she said authentic made it sound like an insult. Lucas had spent exactly 5 minutes with the Cross family, and he already understood why Madeline had walked into his shop looking desperate. These people didn't have conversations. They had verbal fencing matches where every word was chosen to draw blood while maintaining plausible deniability. Why don't we get you both settled? Catherine suggested, gesturing toward the house. Dinner's at 7. Business casual, as always. I'm sure Madeline can help you navigate our dress code, Lucas. I'm sure she can, Lucas agreed, picking up both his duffel bag and Madeline's weekend bag from the car. As they walked into the house, Richard fell into step beside Lucas. So, a mechanic, that's honest work. It pays the bills, Lucas said. I'm sure it does, though I imagine the bills are quite different in your world than in ours. Richard's smile was friendly. His eyes were not. How long have you and Madeline been seeing each other? About 3 months? Funny, she hasn't mentioned you once in our weekly calls. Maybe she wanted to keep something private for once, Lucas suggested. Richard's smile sharpened. Or maybe she wanted to make sure you were worth mentioning before she subjected you to the Cross family experience. We can be a bit intense. I've noticed. Have you now? Richard's laugh was easy, practiced. Well, you haven't seen anything yet. Wait until dinner. That's when things get really interesting. They reached the grand staircase and Madeline touched Lucas's arm. We're in the East Wing. I'll show you to your room. Rooms, Catherine corrected gently. We've put Lucas in the blue room right next to yours, dear. I know you're modern young people, but this is still my home, and we do maintain certain standards. Madeline's cheeks flushed, but she nodded. Of course, Mother, the blue room is lovely. As they climbed the stairs, Lucas could feel multiple sets of eyes on his back, assessing, judging, cataloging every detail for later discussion. He'd walked into war zones that felt less hostile than this entrance hall. Madeline led him down a hallway lined with expensive art and family photos that looked more staged than lived in. She stopped at a door, pushing it open to reveal a bedroom that was bigger than Lucas's entire apartment. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the vineyard, a king-size bed dominated one wall, and the attached bathroom was visible through an open door, all marble and gold fixtures. This is the blue room, Madeline said unnecessarily. Lucas set his bag down, then turned to face her. Your family's intense is like saying the ocean's damp. Madeline closed the door behind them and leaned against it, exhaustion suddenly visible in every line of her body. I'm sorry, I knew they'd be difficult, but don't apologize, Lucas interrupted. You warned me. I went in with eyes open. He studied her face. You okay? I've had warmer welcomes at dental appointments. Lucas surprised himself by laughing. Yeah, I got that impression. Your brother's a piece of work. Richard sees everyone as either competition or a resource. You're currently being evaluated for which category you fall into. And your sister? Victoria measures her worth by how thoroughly she can make others feel inadequate. It's her only real skill. Madeline pushed away from the door, moving to the window. I should let you get settled. Dinner's in an hour. Do you need help with... She stopped as Lucas opened his duffel bag and pulled out the clothes Madeline had sent over. A perfectly fitted blazer in charcoal gray, matching slacks, and a crisp white shirt that had clearly been tailored to his measurements. How did you know my exact size? Lucas asked. Madeline had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. I may have asked one of my employees who's good with measurements to help. She saw that viral video of you and was able to estimate pretty accurately. That's either impressive or creepy. Probably both, Madeline admitted. But you needed clothes that would fit this world, and I needed you to feel comfortable. Consider it tactical preparation. Lucas held up the blazer, checking the fit. It was perfect. Of course it was perfect. This probably cost more than my entire wardrobe combined. Don't think about it that way. Think of it as armor. We're going into battle, and you need the right gear. Lucas looked at her reflection in the window, this woman who ran a $42 million company but couldn't get her own family to see her as anything other than incomplete. Are you always this alone with them? The question hung in the air between them. Madeline's shoulders tensed, then quietly, yes, always. Even when I'm standing right next to them. Lucas set the blazer down carefully. Then I guess it's a good thing you've got backup this weekend. Madeline turned from the window, and for the first time since they'd arrived, she smiled, small but genuine. Yeah, I guess it is. She moved toward the door, then paused. Lucas? Thank you. For coming. For not running when my mother made that comment about mysteries. For just being exactly who you said you'd be. Weekend's not over yet, Lucas pointed out. Still plenty of time for me to embarrass you at dinner. Somehow, I doubt that, Madeline said. See you in 45 minutes? I'll be the one in expensive armor. After she left, Lucas stood alone in the blue room, looking out at vineyards that probably produced wine he'd never taste and couldn't afford if he wanted to. He thought about his shop, about the Honda Civic he'd finished before leaving, about the simple life he'd built brick by careful brick after losing everything that mattered. This weekend was going to test every wall he'd built around his heart. But as he changed into clothes that fit better than anything he'd ever owned, Lucas found himself thinking about Madeline's eyes when she'd said she was always alone with her family. He thought about the way she'd held herself together in front of their judgment, the armor she wore that was so much heavier than any blazer. And he thought about the fact that he'd agreed to this crazy plan not for money, not for excitement, but because he'd recognized something in her that he knew too well. The loneliness of being surrounded by people who looked at you but never actually saw you. Lucas checked his reflection in the mirror, the mechanic from the city wearing clothes worth more than his monthly rent, about to have dinner with people who measured worth in dollars and legacy. Well, he said to his reflection, this should be interesting. Then he opened the door and went to face whatever the Cross family had planned for dinner, knowing that the real test wasn't about surviving their questions or their judgment. It was about helping one woman feel less alone for one weekend. And that, Lucas thought as he walked down the hallway toward sounds of cultured voices and clinking crystal, was something he could do. Even if it cost him more than he was ready to admit. The dining room could have comfortably seated 30 people. Tonight, it held 9. The Cross family arranged around a table that gleamed with crystal and silver, lit by chandeliers that cast everything in a warm glow that felt anything but warm. Lucas sat to Madeline's left, directly across from Victoria and her husband, a man named Henri, who had the kind of aristocratic boredom that came from never having worked a day in his life. Richard and Patricia flanked Robert at the head of the table, while Catherine presided from the opposite end like a queen surveying her court. The 3 children had been banished to eat elsewhere, presumably so the adults could speak freely. So Lucas, Robert began as uniformed staff served the first course, some kind of soup that probably had a French name Lucas wouldn't pronounce correctly. Madeline tells us you own your own business. That's admirable. The American dream, building something from nothing. I don't know about the American dream, Lucas said, picking up the correct spoon without hesitation. Madeline had texted him a diagram of formal place settings during his 45 minutes of preparation. But it's mine, and it pays the bills. How modest, Victoria said, her voice carrying that faint accent that suggested European finishing schools and summers on the Riviera. Tell me, how does one go from being a mechanic to dating someone like our Madeline? It seems quite the social leap. Madeline's water glass stopped halfway to her lips. Lucas met Victoria's eyes calmly. Well, Victoria, I met her at my shop when she needed help. We talked. Turned out we had things in common. As for social leaps, I don't really think in those terms. People are people, regardless of their bank accounts. How very egalitarian, Henri murmured, sounding like he'd never met an actual egalitarian in his life. What kinds of things did you have in common? Patricia asked, her tone suggesting this was a genuine mystery. I'm trying to imagine what a mechanic and a tech CEO would bond over. Lucas took a sip of wine, something that probably cost more per bottle than he made in a day, and considered his answer. We both know what it's like to build something from scratch. We both understand that reputation matters more than advertising, and we both appreciate honesty over performance. The last word hung in the air like a challenge. Catherine's smile didn't waver. Honesty is certainly important, though I've always believed that courtesy and honesty can coexist beautifully when one has sufficient practice. I'm sure they can, Lucas agreed. I just prefer to spend my time fixing engines instead of perfecting diplomatic language. Richard laughed, a sharp sound. I like him, Madeline. He's refreshingly direct. Not at all what I expected. And what did you expect? Madeline asked quietly. Richard swirled his wine, considering. Someone more polished, someone who understood the way our world works, but maybe that's exactly why you chose him, because he doesn't understand it and therefore can't be corrupted by it. Or maybe I chose him because he treats me like a human being instead of a business opportunity, Madeline said, and Lucas heard steel beneath her words. The table fell quiet except for the clink of silverware against china. Well, Catherine said brightly, breaking the silence, I think it's wonderful that you've found someone who sees you that way, dear, though I do hope you're being careful. Relationships that form quickly can dissolve just as quickly when the initial excitement fades. We've been together 3 months, Mother, not 3 weeks. 3 months, Catherine repeated. Yes, that's still quite new, isn't it? The honeymoon phase, as they say. Everything seems magical when you're not yet living with someone's daily realities. Lucas felt Madeline tense beside him. He set down his spoon carefully. Mrs. Cross, I've lived through enough reality to know the difference between magic and substance. What Madeline and I have might be new, but it's built on actually knowing each other, not on avoiding each other's flaws. Catherine's eyebrows rose delicately. And you feel you know my daughter well enough to make that assessment after 3 months? I know she works herself to exhaustion building something real. I know she cares about her clients more than her profit margins. I know she tips servers double because she thinks they're undervalued. And I know she drove 2 hours to find me because she needed someone in her corner who wasn't there for the performance. Lucas paused. Is that enough for 3 months, or should I have memorized her childhood trauma by now? Victoria choked on her wine. Henri looked like he'd just witnessed a car accident. Richard's expression was somewhere between shocked and impressed. Robert, surprisingly, smiled. You've got spine. I'll give you that. It's not spine, Lucas said. It's just the truth. The truth, Robert repeated thoughtfully. An interesting concept. Tell me, Lucas, what's the truth about your business? How's a small auto shop surviving in an economy where dealerships and chains dominate the market? Lucas recognized the shift. Robert moving to more comfortable ground where he could assess and categorize. We survive because we're good at what we do and we charge fair prices. People trust us because we don't upsell them on services they don't need. It's a simple model, but it works. And your growth strategy? Expansion plans? I don't have expansion plans. I have a shop that employs 3 good mechanics, serves customers who need us, and makes enough to keep everyone paid and the lights on. That's sufficient. Robert's fork paused midway to his mouth. Sufficient. Not thriving, not growing, not building towards something larger. Just sufficient. Sufficient is underrated, Lucas said. Not everyone needs to conquer the world. No, Robert agreed slowly. But everyone who's worth their salt wants to leave a mark. Legacy matters, Lucas. What we build, what we pass on, that's what defines us. Lucas thought about Sarah, about the plans they'd made, about the future that had died with her. I think what defines us is how we treat people when we have nothing to gain from treating them well. Legacy's just another word for ego if it comes at the expense of actual human decency. The soup course was cleared in silence so thick you could have cut it with the sterling silver knives. The second course arrived, some kind of fish with a sauce that probably had a name Lucas didn't know. He ate mechanically, aware of every eye on him, every assessment being made. So, Patricia said with forced brightness, Lucas, do you have family in the area? Siblings? Parents we might meet? Madeline's hand found his knee under the table. A warning or a comfort, Lucas couldn't tell which. My parents passed away when I was young, Lucas said evenly. Car accident. I was raised by my uncle. And no siblings. Oh, how tragic, Catherine murmured. And your uncle? Also passed. Heart attack. About 8 years ago. The table processed this information with varying degrees of genuine sympathy and calculating interest. So you're quite alone, Victoria observed. No family at all. That's one way to look at it, Lucas said. Another way is that I've learned to build family from people who choose to be in my life rather than people who share my DNA. How very modern, Henri said in a tone that suggested modern was synonymous with unfortunate. Richard leaned forward, his expression sharp with interest. And have you built that chosen family? People who matter to you outside of Madeline? Lucas thought about the guys at the shop, about Mrs. Chen, who owned the restaurant next door and brought him soup when he worked late, about the customers who'd become friends over years of honest service. Yeah, I have. How lovely, Catherine said. Though I must say there's something irreplaceable about blood family. The history, the shared experiences, the understanding that comes from truly knowing where someone came from. Maybe, Lucas allowed. Or maybe blood family just has more practice at knowing exactly where to stick the knife so it hurts the most. The silence that followed was deafening. Madeline's hand tightened on his knee. Robert set down his wine glass with deliberate precision. That's quite an accusation, young man. It's an observation, Lucas corrected. Not an accusation. And I'm not that young. Lucas, Madeline said quietly, warning in her voice. But Lucas was done being careful. He'd watched this family dissect Madeline's choices since the moment they'd arrived. He'd listened to their polite cruelty disguised as concern, their assessments wrapped in courtesy, their judgment delivered with smiles. I apologize if I've been too direct, Lucas said, not sounding sorry at all. I'm not used to conversations where what people mean and what they say are two completely different things. Where I come from, if you have a problem with someone, you say it. You don't dress it up in compliments and call it love. And where you come from, Victoria said, her voice icy. Do you also make sweeping judgments about families you've known for less than 2 hours? Where I come from, 2 hours is plenty of time to see whether people treat each other with respect or use their connections as an excuse to tear each other down. Richard's laugh was sharp. You think you have us all figured out based on one dinner? I think I figured out that Madeline was right to be nervous about this weekend, and I think she was also right to want someone here who wasn't performing for your approval. Performing, Robert repeated, his voice dangerous now. You think we're performing? I think every single person at this table, except Madeline and me, is playing a role. Concerned mother, protective father, successful older brother, sophisticated younger sister. Everyone's hitting their marks perfectly. It's very polished. Lucas met Robert's eyes steadily. But polish and substance aren't the same thing. The fish course sat forgotten as the Cross family absorbed this assessment. Finally, Robert spoke. You have a lot of opinions for someone who's been invited into our home as a guest. You asked me questions. I answered them honestly. If you wanted polite lies, you should have specified that up front. Lucas, Madeline said again, and this time there was something close to panic in her voice. But Robert surprised everyone by laughing, a genuine sound that seemed to catch even Catherine off guard. You know what? I respect it. Most people who sit at this table spend the entire time trying to figure out what I want to hear. You don't give a damn what I want to hear. Should I? Lucas asked. Probably, if you want a future with my daughter. I have a certain amount of influence over her life, whether she admits it or not. Then here's something else I should probably tell you, Lucas said. I don't want anything from Madeline except her company. I'm not here to network, to advance my business, to access her money or connections or anything else. I'm here because she asked me to be. That's the only reason that matters. Patricia set down her fork with a sharp clink. How refreshingly noble. Though I have to wonder, is it really nobility, or is it just that you don't understand what's actually available to you? Patricia, Richard said, warning in his voice. But Patricia was on a roll. I mean, let's be realistic. Madeline is successful, educated, from a prominent family. She moves in circles where business and personal life naturally intertwine. Are you truly telling us that you wouldn't benefit from her connections? That your little shop wouldn't grow if you had access to her network? Lucas looked at her calmly. My little shop is exactly the size I want it to be. I don't need growth. I don't need connections. What I need is to do good work for fair pay and go home at night knowing I helped someone solve a problem. Madeline's connections don't factor into that equation. Then you're either a liar or a fool, Victoria said bluntly. Everyone wants something. Everyone has an angle. You're just better at hiding yours. Or, Madeline said, her voice cutting through the conversation like a blade, he's telling the truth, and you can't comprehend that because you've never met anyone who values integrity over advancement. Victoria's eyes widened. Excuse me? You heard me. Madeline set down her silverware with careful precision. Lucas came here because I asked him to, not because he thought he'd gain something from our family, not because he's looking for business opportunities, not because he's trying to climb some social ladder you all seem to think everyone's desperate to ascend. He came because I needed help, and he's the kind of person who helps people when they ask. Madeline, darling, Catherine began. No, Mother, you wanted honesty? Let's have honesty. Madeline's voice was steady, but Lucas could see her hands shaking slightly. You've spent the entire meal trying to figure out what's wrong with Lucas, what his angle is, what he's hiding, why he's really here. Oh, because in your world, no one does anything without a motive beyond basic human decency. That's not fair, Richard protested. Isn't it? Madeline turned to her brother. When's the last time you did something for someone without calculating what you'd get in return? When's the last time any of you acted out of simple kindness instead of strategic advantage? The table fell silent. Henri took a long drink of wine. Patricia studied her plate. Victoria's jaw was tight. Even Robert seemed momentarily at a loss for words. Catherine was the first to recover. Darling, I think you're being unfair. We're your family. Everything we do comes from a place of love and concern. Then why, Madeline said quietly, do I always leave these weekends feeling like I've failed some test I didn't know I was taking? The question hung in the air like smoke. Lucas watched Catherine's face cycle through several emotions before settling on practiced concern. If you feel that way, sweetheart, that's something we should discuss. Perhaps in private, where we can speak more freely. We're speaking freely now, Madeline said. Lucas isn't a stranger who needs protecting from family drama. He's here precisely because of it. Yes, Victoria interjected, which brings up an interesting point. You've known this man for 3 months, and you're already using him as a shield against your own family. Don't you think that's a bit dramatic? I think it's survival, Madeline replied. And I think you'd understand that if you'd ever had to defend your choices to people who are determined to find them inadequate. Victoria's laugh was sharp. Please, I married into European nobility. You don't think I face scrutiny? You married someone your family approved of, Madeline countered. Someone whose pedigree matched your expectations. You've never once had to justify your choices because you've only ever made choices they'd celebrate. That's not true, Victoria said, but her voice lacked conviction. Name one time, Madeline challenged. One time you've done something this family didn't immediately embrace. Victoria opened her mouth, closed it, looked to Henri for support. Henri was suddenly very interested in his wine glass. Robert cleared his throat. I think we're getting off track. Lucas, regardless of how this conversation has evolved, I'd like to understand something. You say you value sufficiency over growth. That's a valid personal choice. But what happens when Madeline needs more than sufficiency? She's built a company that's actively expanding. Her world requires ambition, drive, constant evolution. How do you fit into that? It was a good question, a fair question even. Lucas considered it seriously. I fit in by supporting what she's building without trying to change it or control it. I fit in by being someone she doesn't have to perform for, someone who sees her as a person instead of a portfolio. And I fit in by understanding that my worth to her isn't measured by what I can contribute to her business, but by what I contribute to her life. That's a lovely sentiment, Patricia said, but sentiment doesn't pay bills or build futures. No, Lucas agreed. Hard work pays bills, and futures are built by people who show up every day and do what they said they'd do. I might not have your wealth or your connections, but I show up for my customers, for my employees, and for Madeline. That's my contribution. Such refreshing simplicity, Catherine murmured, though I do wonder what happens when the novelty wears off, when Madeline realizes that her world and yours are fundamentally incompatible. Lucas looked at Madeline, who was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Then I guess we'll deal with that when it happens. But I'm not going to assume failure just because we come from different backgrounds. Different backgrounds is putting it mildly, Richard said. Madeline's company did over $40 million in revenue last year. How much did your shop make? The number hung in the air like an accusation. Lucas didn't flinch. Enough to keep 5 families fed and housed. That's the only number that matters to me. And when Madeline's company hits 100 million, 200, Richard pressed, when she's traveling internationally for deals, when she's making decisions that affect hundreds of employees, are you going to be content being the mechanic boyfriend who waits at home? I don't know, Lucas said honestly. We haven't gotten there yet. But I do know that I won't measure my value by comparison to her success. I'll measure it by whether I make her life better or worse. And if it's the latter, I'll have enough respect for both of us to walk away. The honesty seemed to catch everyone off guard. Madeline's hand found his under the table, squeezing tight. Well, Robert said finally, at least you're realistic about your limitations. I prefer to think of them as boundaries, Lucas corrected. Everyone has them. Some people just pretend they don't. The main course arrived, lamb with some kind of reduction that probably required 3 days of preparation. The staff moved efficiently, replacing plates, refilling wine glasses, maintaining the smooth operation of wealth that required invisible labor. For several minutes, everyone ate in relative silence. The tension had shifted from hostile to contemplative, as if the Cross family was reassessing their initial judgments. Then Victoria spoke. I have a question, and I'd like an honest answer. That seems to be the theme tonight, Lucas said. Victoria ignored the comment. Do you love her, my sister? Do you actually love her, or is this just comfortable for you? Madeline went very still beside him. Lucas set down his fork and considered the question seriously. It would be easy to say yes, easy to give them the romantic answer they probably expected, but he'd promised himself he'd be real this weekend, and that meant being honest even when it was complicated. I care about her deeply, Lucas said finally. More than I've cared about anyone in a long time. But love, real love, takes more than 3 months to build. It takes seeing someone at their worst and choosing them anyway. It takes time and trust and 1,000 small decisions to keep showing up even when it's hard. He looked at Madeline. What we have is the foundation for that. Whether it becomes love depends on both of us and whether we're willing to do the work. But I can tell you this, I respect her. I admire her. And I want to see where this goes because she makes me believe that good things are still possible. Madeline's eyes were bright, and Lucas couldn't tell if she was on the verge of tears or just incredibly moved. Victoria sat back in her chair. That's the most honest thing anyone said at this table in years. Victoria, Catherine warned. What? It's true. Victoria looked around at her family. When's the last time any of us talked about love as something that requires work instead of just something that validates our life choices? Henri shifted uncomfortably. Richard and Patricia exchanged a look that spoke volumes. Love, Robert said heavily, is important, but so is compatibility, shared values, similar life trajectories. Victoria's right that honest emotion matters, but emotion alone doesn't sustain a partnership when the practical realities intrude. Then it's a good thing we have more than just emotion, Madeline said quietly. Lucas and I understand each other in ways that have nothing to do with money or status. We both know what it means to build something from nothing. We both value integrity over appearance. And we both know what it's like to be judged by people who've never bothered to understand us. The last sentence landed like an indictment. Catherine's smile was fragile now. Darling, if you feel judged by your own family, I do, Mother. Constantly. Every family gathering is a referendum on my life choices. Every conversation includes some subtle reminder that I'm not married, not producing grandchildren, not fitting into the mold you created for me before I was old enough to have opinions about my own life. That's not fair, Robert said, but his voice lacked conviction. Isn't it? Madeline's voice was steady despite the emotion Lucas could hear beneath it. Tell me, Father, when's the last time you asked about my company without suggesting I should sell it, or go public, or let you acquire it? When's the last time you celebrated my success without comparing it to Richard's? Robert opened his mouth, closed it. Richard looked uncomfortable. Madeline, I never asked for those comparisons. I know you didn't, but they happen anyway. Madeline turned to her brother. You're the golden child, the one who stayed in the family business, married well, produced heirs. You did everything right according to the Cross family playbook. And you think I don't pay a price for that? Richard's voice was sharper than Lucas had heard it all evening. You think it's easy being the one who has to carry on Father's legacy? The one who can't make a single mistake because it might damage the company, the reputation, the family name? The siblings stared at each other across the table, and Lucas realized he was watching something that had been building for years finally surface. I never said it was easy, Madeline said quietly. I just said you did it, and they praised you for it. While I built something on my own, and all I've gotten is questions about when I'm going to settle down and live a real life. Because we worry about you, Catherine interjected. You work yourself to exhaustion. You're always alone. I'm not always alone. Madeline's hand tightened on Lucas's. I have Lucas. I have friends. I have a life that might not look like yours, but it's mine, and it matters. Lucas decided it was time to contribute again. Mrs. Cross, with respect, Madeline's not alone because she can't find people. She's selective about who she lets into her life because she's learned that not everyone who claims to care about you actually has your best interests at heart. Catherine's eyes narrowed. And you think we don't have her best interests at heart? I think you love her, Lucas said carefully. But I also think you love the version of her that fits your expectations more than the version that actually exists. And there's a difference. The table erupted. How dare you? Patricia began. That's completely out of line, Richard added. You've known us for 3 hours, Victoria said sharply. But Robert held up a hand, silencing everyone. He looked at Lucas with an expression that was hard to read. You have courage, I'll give you that. Either that or you're spectacularly stupid. I haven't decided which yet. Probably a little of both, Lucas admitted. But someone needs to say it. You've spent this entire meal testing me, judging Madeline's choices, and questioning whether we belong together. Not once has anyone asked if she's happy. Not once has anyone simply accepted that she made a choice and trusted that it was the right one for her. Because we've seen her make poor choices before, Catherine said. We've watched her prioritize work over wellness, ambition over connection. Forgive us for being concerned when she brings home someone so different from her world. Her world, Lucas repeated. Do you hear how that sounds? Like Madeline exists in some separate realm that I couldn't possibly understand? Like she's not just a person trying to build a meaningful life. She's not just a person, Robert said firmly. She's a cross. That comes with responsibilities, expectations, standards. And what if she doesn't want those things? Lucas asked. What if she just wants to be seen for who she is instead of who you think she should be? The question landed in silence. Madeline took a shaky breath beside him. That's exactly what I want. What I've always wanted. Catherine looked at her daughter with something that might have been pain or might have been recognition. Sweetheart, we do see you. No, Mother. You see potential. You see possibility. You see all the ways I could be more or different or better, according to standards I never agreed to. Madeline's voice broke slightly. But Lucas sees me. Just me. Without the company, without the family name, without all the things you think define my worth. And that's why I brought him here, because I needed to remember what it feels like to be enough exactly as I am. The words hung in the candlelit air, raw and honest and impossible to ignore. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Robert set down his napkin with careful precision. I think we need a break. Everyone's emotions are running high, and we're saying things that perhaps should be said more carefully. It was a retreat disguised as wisdom, and everyone recognized it for what it was. Staff appeared as if summoned by telepathy, clearing plates, offering coffee and dessert. The family scattered, Richard and Patricia to the terrace, Victoria and Henri to the library, Catherine toward the kitchen to check on preparations for tomorrow. Robert stood, looked at Lucas and Madeline still seated at the table. Lucas, a word in my study if you don't mind. It wasn't a request. Madeline's hand tightened on his. Father, it's fine, Lucas said quietly. He stood, squeezed her hand once, then followed Robert through the house to a wood-paneled study that smelled like old books and expensive scotch. Robert poured 2 glasses without asking, handed one to Lucas, then settled into a leather chair that had probably cost more than Lucas's first car. You've got balls, Robert said without preamble. I'll give you that. Not many people walk into my home and tell me I don't know my own daughter. Lucas sipped the scotch. It was smooth, complex, probably older than he was. I didn't say you don't know her. I said you love the version of her that fits your expectations more than the version that exists. There's a difference. Is there? Robert studied him over his glass. Or are you just a man who's in over his head and using righteous anger to avoid admitting it? Maybe both, Lucas said, but that doesn't make me wrong. Robert laughed, a genuine sound. You're either the bravest man I've ever met or the stupidest. I genuinely can't decide which. Why does it have to be one or the other? Because brave men calculate risks. Stupid men walk into fights they can't win. Robert leaned forward. Let me be clear about something, Lucas. I built an empire from nothing. I know what real ambition looks like, what real drive requires. And I know that relationships between people from fundamentally different worlds rarely survive. Then I guess it's a good thing Madeline and I aren't from different worlds. We're just from different tax brackets. Robert's smile was sharp. Tax brackets create worlds, son. Don't fool yourself into thinking otherwise. Lucas met his eyes steadily. Mr. Cross, I respect what you've built. I respect your success and your empire, but I don't respect the way you measure your daughter's worth by standards she never agreed to, and I won't apologize for saying so. For a long moment, Robert just looked at him. Then he set down his glass with a decisive clink. You're going to break her heart, Robert said quietly, not because you mean to, but because eventually the reality of who you are and who she is will create a gap too wide to bridge. And when that happens, my daughter will be the one who pays the price. Or, Lucas said, we'll build that bridge together, one honest conversation at a time, one choice at a time, one moment of choosing each other over the easy path. Optimism. Robert's voice was heavy. That's what breaks in the end. Reality has a way of wearing down even the strongest optimism. Lucas thought about Sarah, about loss, about the years he'd spent believing nothing good would ever happen again. I've had my optimism broken before, Mr. Cross. I know what that costs, but I also know that cynicism is just another kind of cowardice. It's easier to assume failure than to risk hoping for something better. Robert stood, moved to the window overlooking the vineyard. My daughter thinks I don't see her. She's wrong. I see her perfectly. I see her working herself to exhaustion, proving something to people who don't matter, sacrificing personal happiness for professional success. And I worry that she's becoming so hardened by the need to be enough that she'll never let anyone actually love her. The honesty caught Lucas off guard. Then tell her that, Lucas said quietly. Tell her you're worried, not disappointed. Tell her you see her strength, not just her defiance. Tell her she's enough without qualifications or conditions. Robert turned from the window. Is that what you do? I try. And she believes you? Sometimes. When she lets herself. Robert nodded slowly, something shifting in his expression. You care about her. I can see that at least. I do. Then prove it. Robert's voice was hard again. Not to me. To her. Show her that you're not just another person who'll use her kindness against her. Because if you hurt my daughter, intentionally or not, you'll discover that money isn't the only kind of power in this world. Lucas held his gaze. Fair enough. But understand something, Mr. Cross. I'm not afraid of your power. I'm afraid of hurting her. Those fears aren't the same thing, and which one motivates me matters. For the first time since they'd entered the study, Robert smiled, a real smile, without calculation or assessment. Maybe you're not as stupid as I thought, he said. High praise, Lucas said dryly. The highest I give. Robert moved toward the door. Come on, let's rescue Madeline from whatever interrogation my wife's probably conducting. They found Madeline in the garden, standing alone under lights that turned the cultivated landscape into something almost magical. She turned as they approached, her face carefully neutral. "Did he threaten you?" she asked Lucas. "A little," Lucas admitted. "Did you deserve it?" "Probably." Madeline's lips quirked. "Good. You were pretty brutal at dinner." "So were you." "I know." She looked at her father. "I meant what I said. All of it." Robert studied his daughter for a long moment. "I know you did. And maybe I needed to hear it." He paused, something uncomfortable crossing his face. "I don't know how to tell you I'm proud without it sounding like I'm disappointed you didn't do things my way." Madeline's breath caught. "Try anyway." "I'm proud," Robert said quietly, "of what you've built, of who you've become, of the strength it takes to stand in a room full of people who expect you to fail and refuse to give them the satisfaction. You're more like me than you want to admit, and that's both the highest compliment I can give and the thing that worries me most." Tears tracked down Madeline's cheeks. "Why does it worry you?" "Because I know what it cost me to build what I built, and I don't want you to pay the same price." Father and daughter looked at each other across the distance that years of expectations had created, and Lucas saw something shift. Not healed, maybe, but acknowledged. "I should let you two talk," Lucas said quietly. But Madeline caught his hand. "No, stay. You're part of this now." So Lucas stayed while Robert and Madeline had the kind of conversation they should have had years ago, about fear disguised as control, about love expressed through criticism, about the gap between wanting the best for someone and trusting them to define what best actually means. And as night deepened over the vineyard and the lights of the estate glowed against the darkness, Lucas realized that this weekend wasn't about performing for Madeline's family. It was about helping her remember who she was when no one was watching. And maybe, just maybe, about reminding himself of the same thing. The conversation in the garden stretched past midnight, and when it finally ended, Lucas walked Madeline back to the east wing with her father's parting words still echoing in his mind. Robert had looked at Lucas directly and said, "Take care of her this weekend, not because I'm asking, because she needs it." Then he'd walked back into the house, leaving them alone under stars that seemed too bright for wine country. "That was unexpected," Madeline said as they climbed the stairs. Her voice was raw from crying, from laughing, from finally saying things she'd held back for years. "Which part? Your father admitting he's proud of you, or him essentially giving me permission to be here?" "Both, neither, all of it." Madeline stopped at her bedroom door, exhaustion written across her features. "I've spent 5 years coming to these gatherings, braced for battle. I didn't expect tonight to end with something that felt like progress." Lucas leaned against the wall, studying her face in the hallway's soft lighting. "You think it'll stick? Or will everyone wake up tomorrow and pretend it never happened?" "I don't know. My family's good at compartmentalizing, but at least it's out there now. At least they heard it." She met his eyes. "Thank you for saying the things I couldn't say myself." "You said plenty. Only after you went first, only after you made it clear that someone in that room was actually on my side." Madeline's hand rested on her doorknob, but she didn't turn it. "Lucas, what Robert said about us being from different worlds, don't." Lucas straightened from the wall. "We're not doing this now. You're exhausted, emotionally wrung out, and it's past midnight. Whatever conversation we need to have about reality and compatibility and all the practical concerns your family raised, we'll have it, but not tonight." Madeline nodded, relief visible in her expression. "Tomorrow?" "Tomorrow, after you've had coffee and aren't running on adrenaline and family drama." She smiled, tired but genuine. "Deal. Good night, Lucas." "Good night, Madeline." Lucas watched her disappear into her room before heading to the blue room next door. The space felt emptier than it had hours earlier, or maybe he just felt the weight of the evening settling on his shoulders. He changed into sleep clothes and lay in a bed that was too soft, too expensive, too far removed from his normal life. Sleep didn't come easily. His mind kept replaying the dinner conversation, the study confrontation with Robert, the moment when Madeline had gripped his hand in the garden like he was the only solid thing in a shifting world. He'd walked into this weekend expecting to play a role, to be Madeline's shield against family judgment for 3 days, and then return to his simple life unchanged. But something had shifted. He'd stopped performing the moment he'd looked across that dinner table and seen Madeline's hand shaking as her mother questioned her life choices. He'd stopped calculating responses when Richard had implied Lucas was too small for Madeline's world. And he'd completely abandoned any pretense of diplomacy when Victoria had suggested he was hiding ulterior motives. The truth was simpler and more dangerous than any role he could have played. He cared. About Madeline. About defending her against people who should have been her greatest champions. About making sure she knew that someone saw her clearly and valued exactly what they saw. Lucas finally drifted off somewhere around 3 in the morning, his last conscious thought being that caring about people was always more complicated than it should be. Morning arrived too early, announced by sunlight streaming through windows he'd forgotten to cover. Lucas showered, dressed in jeans and a casual button-down from the wardrobe Madeline had provided, and made his way downstairs following the scent of coffee and something baking. The kitchen was enormous, all marble counters and professional-grade appliances, and surprisingly empty except for one person. Victoria sat at the breakfast bar with a cup of coffee, still in silk pajamas and a robe that probably cost more than Lucas's monthly mortgage. She looked up as he entered, her expression unreadable. "Coffee's fresh," she said, gesturing to a machine that looked like it required an engineering degree to operate. "Fair warning, it's stronger than you're probably used to." Lucas poured himself a cup, doctored it with cream and sugar, and took an experimental sip. It was excellent. Of course it was excellent. Everything in this house was excellent, except the emotional temperature. "How'd you sleep?" Victoria asked. Like someone who just survived a hostile dinner interrogation. To his surprise, Victoria laughed. "Yeah, we weren't exactly subtle, were we?" Lucas settled onto a stool across from her. "Is there a reason you're talking to me like a human being this morning instead of dissecting my net worth and life choices?" Victoria took a long sip of her coffee. "I've been thinking about what you said last night. About us loving the version of Madeline that fits our expectations more than the version that exists. That bothered me." "Good. It should. Don't push it." But her tone lacked real heat. "I called my sister a lot of things over the years, stubborn, difficult, too independent for her own good, but I never once considered that maybe those weren't flaws, that maybe she was just refusing to be someone she's not." Lucas waited, sensing there was more coming. "I married Henri because he was exactly what my family wanted," Victoria continued. "Old money, European connections, impeccable lineage. It was the smart choice, the strategic choice. And I've spent 6 years in a marriage that looks perfect from the outside and feels empty on the inside." "I'm sorry," Lucas said, and meant it. "Don't be. I made my choice with full awareness of what I was trading, security for passion, approval for authenticity. I thought I was being mature, choosing practical over emotional, but watching you defend Madeline last night, watching her defend you, I realized I've never had someone look at me the way she looks at you." Lucas shifted uncomfortably. "Victoria, I don't think—" "I'm not hitting on you," Victoria interrupted. "God, no. You're not my type at all, too earnest, too direct. I prefer men who understand subtext." She paused. "But you're exactly Madeline's type. Someone who doesn't play games. Someone who says what they mean and means what they say. Someone who chose her without calculating what he'd get in return." "How do you know I didn't calculate?" "Because you were genuinely shocked when Patricia mentioned Madeline's revenue numbers. Either you're the best actor I've ever met, or you really didn't know how successful she is. And given everything else about you, I'm betting on the latter." Lucas didn't confirm or deny. He just drank his coffee and waited to see where this conversation was going. "Madeline's company did $42 million last year," Victoria said quietly. "But she's positioning for acquisition offers that could value it at triple that. Maybe more. She's built something genuinely impressive, and she's done it entirely on her own without family money or connections. That's not cute or small or a hobby. That's legitimate success." "I know that," Lucas said. "Do you?" "Because Richard's right about one thing. When she's traveling for international deals, when she's making decisions that affect hundreds of jobs, when she's operating at that level, it's going to be hard for someone who owns a small auto shop to understand the pressure she's under." Lucas set down his coffee cup with careful precision. "You want to know what I understand? I understand that pressure doesn't care about the size of your business. It cares about whether the people depending on you get what they need. Madeline manages 67 employees. I manage 3. The number's different, but the responsibility is the same, making sure people can feed their families. Victoria studied him with something that might have been respect. You really believe that? I really do. Then you're either remarkably enlightened or dangerously naive. Probably both, Lucas admitted. But I'm here anyway. The kitchen door swung open, and Madeline appeared looking sleep-rumpled and beautiful in yoga pants and an oversized sweater. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, her face free of makeup, and she looked more real than she had at any point yesterday. Coffee, she said, making a beeline for the machine. Please tell me there's coffee. There's coffee, Victoria confirmed, and your boyfriend's having an existential conversation with me about business pressure and responsibility. Madeline paused mid-pour to look at Lucas. You okay? Fine. Just learning more about your company's valuation. Understanding dawned in Madeline's eyes. Victoria told you about the acquisition offers. She mentioned them. And you're processing the fact that your girlfriend might be worth over $100 million in the near future. Lucas considered this. Honestly, the number's so big it doesn't feel real. It's like hearing someone won the lottery. Good for them, but it doesn't change my day-to-day reality. Victoria laughed. Most men would be planning how to propose right about now. Most men don't have his moral compass, Madeline said, settling onto the stool beside Lucas. She leaned against his shoulder briefly, a gesture of trust that seemed unconscious. Lucas doesn't want my money. He barely tolerates the clothes I bought him. They're nice clothes, Lucas protested. I'm just not used to blazers that cost more than my monthly utilities. See? Madeline looked at her sister. This is what authenticity looks like. No performance, no calculation, just honest discomfort with spending what he considers ridiculous amounts on fabric. Victoria's expression had gone thoughtful. Maddie, can I ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly? When have I ever answered dishonestly? Fair point. Victoria took a breath. Are you happy? With him? With this? With where your life is right now? Madeline went still. Lucas felt her tension against his shoulder, felt her calculating how much to reveal. Answer honestly, he murmured. Not for her. For you. Madeline looked at him, then at her sister. I'm happier than I've been in years. My company's thriving, I'm doing work that matters, and for the first time in my adult life, I have someone in my corner who isn't there because we share DNA or business interests. So yes, Victoria, I'm happy, even when it's complicated. Victoria's smile was sad. Good. Someone in this family should be. Before either of them could respond, the kitchen filled with more people. Richard appeared with Patricia and their children, followed by Catherine looking impeccable despite the early hour, and finally Robert in casual weekend attire that probably still cost thousands of dollars. Breakfast became a production, staff appearing with pastries and fruit, eggs cooked to individual specifications, conversation flowing around topics carefully chosen to avoid last night's landmines. The children provided convenient distraction, chattering about activities planned for the day. Horseback riding, swimming in the estate's pool, exploring the vineyards. Lucas, Robert said during a lull in conversation, you ride? Horses? Not since I was a kid. We've got stable full of gentle mounts. Thought we might take a ride through the property this morning. Give you a proper tour. It was phrased as an invitation, but felt like a summons. Lucas glanced at Madeline, who gave him a nearly imperceptible nod. Sure, Lucas said. Sounds good. An hour later, Lucas found himself on a horse named Reggie, who seemed perfectly content to plod along behind Robert's larger mount. They rode through manicured vineyards, past equipment sheds that were nicer than most people's homes, along paths that offered views of rolling hills covered in grapevines. Robert didn't speak for the first 20 minutes, just rode, occasionally pointing out features of the property, the irrigation system, the soil composition, the varietals planted in different sections. It was peaceful in a way Lucas hadn't expected, and he found himself relaxing despite knowing this was another test. Finally, Robert pulled his horse to a stop at a high point overlooking the valley. Lucas stopped beside him, and they sat in silence, watching wind ripple through the vines like waves on a green ocean. My father worked in a factory, Robert said abruptly. 12-hour shifts, 6 days a week, for wages that barely kept food on the table. He died at 52 from a heart attack at his workstation. Never owned anything, never traveled anywhere, never had a single day where he wasn't worried about money. Lucas listened without interrupting. I was 14 when he died. I swore I'd never live like that. Never be powerless, never be dependent on someone else's mercy for my survival. So I worked. I studied. I built. Robert's voice was distant, lost in memory. By the time I was 30, I'd made my first million. By 40, I'd built an empire. And I told myself it was all worth it. The long hours, the missed family dinners, the relationships sacrificed on the altar of success. Was it? Lucas asked quietly. That's the question, isn't it? Robert turned to look at him. I gave my children everything my father couldn't give me. Security, opportunity, education. But somewhere along the way, I also gave them the burden of expectations, the weight of legacy, the pressure to be worthy of everything I'd built. Madeline doesn't need to be worthy, Lucas said. She already is. She just needs you to see it. I do see it. That's what terrifies me. Robert's hands tightened on the reins. She's the most like me of all my children. The same drive, the same refusal to quit, the same willingness to sacrifice everything for success. Richard runs my company well, but he doesn't have her fire. Victoria chose security over ambition, but Madeline, she's building something real, something that matters, and she's doing it the same way I did. Alone. She's not alone, isn't she? Can you honestly tell me you understand the pressure she's under, the decisions she faces, the weight of knowing that 67 families depend on her making the right call every single time? Lucas thought about his 3 employees, Tony, who had 2 kids in college, Marcus, who was supporting his elderly mother, and Jenny, who was saving for her wedding. He thought about the responsibility he felt every time business was slow, every time he had to decide whether to bid low to win a job or charge what the work was actually worth. The scale's different, Lucas said finally, but the weight isn't. When you're responsible for other people's livelihoods, it doesn't matter if it's 3 people or 67. The pressure's real either way. Robert's laugh was sharp. You really believe that? I really do. And more importantly, I believe Madeline needs someone in her life who sees her as a person first and a CEO second. Someone who reminds her that her worth isn't measured by revenue numbers or acquisition offers or how well she's maintaining your legacy. And you're that person? I'm trying to be. Robert was quiet for a long moment, his gaze on the valley below. Catherine thinks you're going to hurt Madeline. Not intentionally, but inevitably. She thinks the gap between your worlds is too wide to bridge. Your wife might be right, Lucas admitted. I can't promise this works out. I can't promise we don't hit a point where the differences become insurmountable. But I can promise that I won't hurt her by treating her like a business opportunity or a status symbol or anything other than who she actually is. Is that enough? I don't know, but it's all I've got to offer. Robert turned his horse, starting back down the path. Lucas followed, and they rode in silence until the estate came back into view. Then Robert spoke again, his voice quieter. When Catherine and I got married, I had nothing. She came from money, from a family that thought she was marrying beneath herself. They gave us 5 years before the marriage fell apart. He paused. We've been married for 42 years, built a life, raised children, survived things that should have broken us. And you know what made the difference? What? She chose to believe in what we were building instead of what everyone said we couldn't have. She chose faith over fear. Robert looked at Lucas directly. If you're going to be with my daughter, you'll need to make the same choice. Every day, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. I understand. Do you? Because Madeline spent her entire adult life proving herself to people who refuse to believe in her. She's built walls so high that it takes a wrecking ball to get through. If you're not prepared to be that wrecking ball, consistently, relentlessly, without giving up when she pushes back, then you're wasting both your time and hers. Lucas thought about the way Madeline had gripped his hand in the garden, the vulnerability in her voice when she'd admitted she just wanted to be seen. I'm prepared. Then prove it. Not to me. To her. Show her that someone can see past her defenses and choose her anyway. They reached the stables and grooms appeared to handle the horses. As Lucas dismounted, his phone buzzed with a text from Madeline. Madeline: did my father give you the intimidating ride through the vineyard lecture? Lucas: is that what that was? I thought we were just sightseeing. Madeline: liar. Are you okay? Lucas: fine, your dad's intense but fair. Where are you? Madeline: pool house with Victoria and Patricia. Come save me before they start planning my wedding. Lucas: on my way. Lucas found the pool house easily, a structure that was bigger than his entire shop, complete with full kitchen, lounge area, and a bathroom that featured a shower with more jets than seemed necessary. Madeline sat on a chaise lounge looking trapped, while Victoria and Patricia flanked her like prosecutors presenting a case. I'm just saying, Patricia was explaining as Lucas entered. You've been together 3 months. That's long enough to know if it's serious. It is serious, Madeline protested. Then why haven't you introduced him to your business partners, your board, your key clients? Patricia's tone was reasonable, which somehow made it more dangerous. If Lucas is truly part of your life, he should be integrated into all aspects of it. Or, Lucas interjected, settling onto the arm of Madeline's chaise, maybe Madeline keeps her personal and professional lives separate because she's learned that mixing them creates complications. Patricia turned to him with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. How would you know? You've never operated at her level. True, but I've watched successful people crash and burn because they couldn't separate who they were from what they did. At least when work is separate, failure in one area doesn't destroy everything. Spoken like someone who's afraid of real ambition, Patricia said. Spoken like someone who's seen ambition destroy people, Lucas corrected. There's a difference. Victoria leaned forward, interested, despite herself. You've seen that. Someone destroyed by their own success. Lucas thought about Sarah, about the promising career she'd been building before the accident, about the way her firm had sent flowers to the funeral and never contacted him again. Success isn't what destroys people. It's the inability to define themselves outside of their achievements. When your worth is entirely tied to your performance, any setback becomes an existential crisis. And you think Madeline's heading that direction? Patricia's voice was sharp. I think Madeline's worked incredibly hard to build something meaningful, and I think she deserves to have parts of her life that aren't measured by productivity or profit. Lucas looked at Madeline. Everyone needs something that exists just for them, something that doesn't have to prove its worth to anyone else. Madeline's eyes were bright. And that's what you are? My something that doesn't have to prove itself. I'm trying to be. How romantic, Patricia said dryly. The mechanic as emotional safe space. Better than the husband as status accessory, Madeline shot back, and Patricia's face went tight. Victoria laughed, surprised and genuine. Oh, this is getting good. Patricia, she's got you there. Richard's many things, but emotional safe space isn't one of them. And Henri is, Patricia countered. Victoria's smile faded. No, he's not. Which is why I'm sitting here envying my little sister instead of dismissing her choices. The pool house went quiet. Through the windows, Lucas could see the children playing in the pool, their laughter carrying on the warm afternoon air. Normal kid sounds in a world that felt increasingly surreal. I'm going to say something, Victoria announced, and I need everyone to actually listen instead of immediately arguing. This should be good, Patricia muttered. Victoria ignored her. Madeline, you brought Lucas here because you needed backup. Someone who wouldn't be impressed by the money or intimidated by the family dynamics. Someone who would just be solidly, boringly on your side without calculation or agenda. That's accurate, Madeline agreed cautiously. And you found that. Lucas is exactly what you needed. Honest, direct, completely uninterested in performing for approval. But here's my question. What happens after this weekend? When you go back to your real life and he goes back to his, and you're facing the actual challenges of maintaining a relationship across fundamental lifestyle differences. It was the question Lucas had been avoiding since he'd agreed to this arrangement. The question that had kept him awake at 3 a.m. The question that Robert had essentially demanded he answer on horseback. Madeline looked at Lucas, and he saw the same uncertainty in her eyes that he felt in his chest. I don't know, Madeline said finally. We haven't figured that out yet. Then you should, Victoria said gently. Because weekend solidarity is one thing. Building an actual future is something else entirely. We know that, Lucas said. We're not naive about the challenges. Aren't you? Patricia leaned back, her expression calculating. Madeline works 60-hour weeks. She travels for client meetings. She's positioning for an acquisition that will require even more of her time and energy. You run a shop that needs you there daily. You have employees who depend on your physical presence. How exactly do those realities coexist? People make it work all the time, Madeline said, but her voice lacked conviction. Do they? Or do they make compromises that eventually breed resentment? One person sacrificing their ambitions, the other feeling guilty for pursuing theirs. Patricia's voice was softer now, almost kind. I'm not trying to be cruel, I'm trying to be realistic. Long-term relationships require compatible visions for the future. Do you two even know what your visions are? Lucas felt Madeline's hand find his, her grip tight. Our vision, Madeline said carefully, is to build something real, something based on honesty and respect instead of convenience and social expectation. Beyond that, we're figuring it out as we go. That's not a vision, Patricia said. That's hope. Maybe hope's enough, Lucas said. Maybe constantly calculating outcomes and managing expectations is exactly what kills relationships. Maybe what matters is choosing each other every day and trusting that the details will work themselves out. Or maybe, Patricia countered, that kind of thinking is what leads to divorce courts and custody battles and bitter ex-partners who can't understand where it all went wrong. The words landed hard, and Lucas realized Patricia wasn't just challenging them. She was warning them based on something she'd witnessed or experienced. Victoria stood abruptly. Okay, this got dark. I'm going for a swim. Anyone want to join me? I should check on the children, Patricia said, also standing. Make sure they're not drowning each other. After they left, Madeline and Lucas sat in silence, broken only by distant laughter and splashing. Patricia's right about one thing, Madeline said finally. We need to talk about the practical realities, what this actually looks like beyond this weekend. I know, but I'm terrified to have that conversation, because what if we can't find answers that work? What if the differences really are insurmountable? Lucas turned to face her fully. Then we'll know. And we'll make decisions based on truth instead of hope. But Madeline, we can't avoid the conversation just because we're afraid of the answers. I'm not avoiding it. She stopped, frustrated. I've built my entire life around being independent, around not needing anyone, not depending on anyone. And now I've found someone who makes me want to try something different, and I have no idea how to do it without compromising everything I've worked for. Who said you have to compromise everything? Everyone. My family, my board, even my own brain. There's this voice that keeps saying successful women can't have both. That choosing relationship means sacrificing career, and choosing career means accepting loneliness. Lucas pulled her closer. That voice is wrong. Maybe it's hard. Maybe it requires more creativity and communication than either of us is comfortable with. But people build lives together across all kinds of differences. Geography, careers, lifestyles. They make it work when they want it badly enough. Do you want it badly enough? The question came out small, vulnerable. Lucas thought about his simple life, about the walls he'd built around his heart after Sarah died. He thought about how easy it would be to walk away right now, to return to his safe existence where nothing hurt because nothing mattered too much. Then he thought about Madeline's hand in his in the garden, about defending her at dinner, about the way she looked at him like he was something worth keeping. Yeah, he said. I do. I want to try. Even if it's messy and complicated and requires more emotional heavy lifting than I'm comfortable with, I want to see if we can build something real. Madeline's eyes were wet. What if I'm not good at this? At being with someone, at making space for someone else in my carefully constructed life? Then you'll learn. We'll both learn. That's what relationships are. Two people constantly figuring out how to be themselves while also being an us. That sounds exhausting. Probably is, Lucas agreed, but maybe it's worth it. Madeline leaned against him, her head on his shoulder. They sat like that for a long time, listening to sounds of family echoing around the pool house, both of them thinking about futures that seemed simultaneously possible and impossible. Finally, Madeline spoke. Lucas, what Robert said on your ride, about me being like him, building things alone. Was he right? Lucas chose his words carefully. I think you've learned to be self-sufficient because depending on others felt dangerous. But being capable of doing things alone isn't the same as wanting to be alone. How do you know what I want? Because you walked into my shop and asked for help. Because you brought me here even though it meant admitting you couldn't handle your family solo. Because right now, you're leaning against me instead of maintaining the armor you wear with everyone else. Madeline was quiet. Then, I'm scared. Of what? Of wanting this. Of letting you matter. Of building something I could lose. Lucas understood that fear intimately. He'd lived it for 6 years. Me too. Really? Really? Caring about people is terrifying, especially when you've already lost someone who mattered. Madeline lifted her head to look at him. You've lost someone. It wasn't a question. Lucas nodded. My wife, Sarah. Car accident 6 years ago. We'd been married for 4 years, together for 8. She was the one who pushed me to open my own shop instead of working for someone else. The one who believed I could build something meaningful. I'm sorry, Madeline said softly. I didn't know. How could you? It's not exactly first date conversation. Lucas looked out at the pool, at sunlight dancing on water. After she died, I shut down everything except work, convinced myself that caring about anyone else was too risky, that keeping my world small and controlled was the only way to survive. What changed? You walked into my shop looking like you were holding yourself together with pure willpower and designer clothes. And I recognized something in you that I knew too well. The loneliness of being surrounded by people who see what they want to see instead of who you actually are. Madeline's breath caught. So you said yes because you felt sorry for me? I said yes because I recognized that you were asking for help, and I remembered what it felt like to need help and have no one to ask. Lucas turned to face her fully. But I'm still here. After the hostile dinner, after your father's interrogation, after Patricia's dire warnings, because somewhere between your shop visit and now, you stopped being a stranger who needed help and became someone I want to know better. Even knowing it's complicated? Especially knowing it's complicated. Simple doesn't mean worthwhile. Complicated just means we have to work harder to get it right. Madeline kissed him then, not the performance kiss they'd shared earlier when Victoria was watching, but something real and tentative and full of possibility. When they broke apart, she was smiling. Okay, she said, let's have the scary conversation about what this looks like, about how we make it work, about all the practical details Patricia thinks will destroy us. Now? Now, before I lose my nerve. So they talked about her 60-hour work weeks and his shop schedule, about her travel requirements and his employee dependencies, about the reality that her world operated at a scale he'd never experienced, and his world valued things her industry often dismissed. They talked about compromise and boundaries, about what they each needed to feel valued, about the fear of losing themselves in trying to accommodate someone else. They talked honestly, sometimes uncomfortably, always authentically. And by the time the sun started its descent toward the horizon, they'd built something that looked almost like a plan. Imperfect, provisional, requiring constant adjustment, but real. Lucas looked at Madeline in the golden light and thought that maybe Robert was right. Maybe the choice between fear and faith was the only one that mattered. And maybe, just maybe, he was ready to choose faith. Evening arrived with the kind of spectacular sunset that only wine country could produce. The sky painted in shades of amber and rose, the vineyard rose casting long shadows across manicured earth. The family gathered on the main terrace for what Catherine called casual drinks before dinner, which meant everyone was expected to dress well and behave better. Lucas had changed into slacks and a light sweater that Madeline assured him struck the right balance between effort and ease. She wore a simple dress in deep blue that made her eyes look almost luminous, her hair down and curling slightly at the ends. They descended the staircase together, and Lucas felt her tension increase with each step closer to her family. Remember, he murmured as they reached the terrace doors, we survived last night. Tonight's just an encore performance. Last night ended with my father giving you the legacy speech and my mother looking like she'd swallowed glass. I'm not sure that counts as survival. We're both still standing. That's survival in my book. The terrace was elegant, wrought iron furniture arranged in conversational clusters, heaters already warming the space against the evening chill, waitstaff circulating with wine and appetizers that looked like small works of art. The family was scattered across the space in what appeared casual but Lucas suspected was carefully orchestrated positioning. Catherine spotted them first. "Madeline, darling, you look lovely. Lucas, that color suits you." "Thank you, Mrs. Cross." "Please, call me Catherine. We're past formalities now, don't you think?" Her smile was warm. Her eyes were calculating. "Come, have some wine. We're tasting the estate's new release. Robert's quite proud of it." Robert appeared as if summoned, holding a glass of red wine that caught the fading sunlight. "It's a Cab Franc blend, bold but balanced. Thought we'd showcase the property's output." Lucas accepted a glass from a passing server and took a sip. It was excellent, complex, smooth, with layers he couldn't identify but appreciated nonetheless. "This is impressive." "We think so. The vineyard manager spent 3 years perfecting the soil composition. Attention to detail makes all the difference." Robert's tone was casual, but Lucas heard the subtext. Attention to detail was valued here, and Lucas himself was being scrutinized for how well he measured up. Richard joined them, Patricia at his side looking elegant in cream linen. "Lucas, I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday, about your shop, your approach to business. I'm curious, have you ever considered expanding? Maybe opening additional locations?" "Not really," Lucas said honestly. "I like knowing everyone who works for me. I like being able to vouch personally for the quality of every repair. Expansion would mean losing that direct connection. But you'd reach more customers, employ more people, have greater impact. Or I'd become a manager instead of a mechanic, spend my time dealing with administrative headaches instead of actually fixing things, and lose the whole reason I started the business in the first place." Patricia sipped her wine thoughtfully. "It sounds like you're afraid of success." "It sounds like I have different definitions of success than you do," Lucas corrected. "I'm successful by the metrics that matter to me. My customers trust me, my employees are paid fairly, and I go home at night feeling like I did something useful. If that's not ambitious enough for you, I'm okay with that." Victoria appeared from inside the house, Henri trailing behind her looking perpetually bored. "Are we interrogating Lucas again? I thought we agreed to give him one night off from the Cross family inquisition." "We're having a conversation," Richard said, "not an interrogation." "Semantics." Victoria claimed a chair, arranging herself with practiced grace. "Lucas, ignore them. They can't help themselves. Measuring and comparing is hardwired into their DNA." "Our DNA," Madeline corrected quietly. "You're part of this family too, Victoria." "Technically, but I married my way out of the constant competition. You're the one who stayed close enough to get caught in the crossfire." Catherine's expression tightened. "Victoria, that's not fair." "Isn't it? Richard competes with father for business dominance. Madeline competes with expectations she never agreed to. And I compete with the memory of who I was supposed to become before I chose security over authenticity." Victoria's laugh was brittle. "We're all performing, Mother. Lucas is just the first person honest enough to call us on it." The terrace fell uncomfortably silent. Lucas looked at Madeline, who was gripping her wine glass like a lifeline. He set his own glass down and said, "You know what? I'm going to step away for a minute. Let you all have whatever family conversation this is turning into." You don't have to," Madeline said quickly. "I know, but I think maybe you need 5 minutes with just your family. I'll be inside if you need me." Lucas walked into the house before anyone could protest, finding himself in a library that probably held more books than he'd read in his entire life. Floor-to-ceiling shelves, leather furniture, the smell of old paper and expensive wood. He pulled a book at random, something about California viticulture, and settled into a chair by the window where he could see the terrace but not hear the conversation. He watched the Cross family through glass, their gestures animated, their expressions ranging from defensive to frustrated to something that might have been honest emotion. Catherine's posture was rigid. Robert's hands moved as he spoke, emphatic. Richard looked caught between his parents and sisters. Victoria had her arms crossed, and Madeline looked like she was finally saying things she'd held back for too long. Lucas had been sitting there for maybe 10 minutes when the library door opened. He expected Madeline, but instead found Robert. "Mind if I join you?" Robert asked. "It's your house." That's not an answer, but Robert settled into the chair across from Lucas anyway, bringing his wine glass with him. "You walked away. Smart move. Seemed like you all needed space for a family conversation." "We needed space from our own bullshit, if we're being honest." Robert took a drink. "Victoria's right. We do perform. We measure and compare and compete instead of just being people who happen to share DNA. It's exhausting." Lucas set down the book he hadn't been reading. "Then why do it?" "Because it's what we know. Because building an empire requires a certain mindset, and that mindset doesn't come with an off switch. Because somewhere along the way, we forgot how to just be a family instead of a corporation. You could change that. Could we?" Robert's smile was sad. "I'm 71 years old, Lucas. I've been playing this game for 50 years. The patterns are so ingrained I'm not sure I know how to function without them." "Your daughter's trying to break those patterns. That's what this weekend is really about." Robert studied him. "You're perceptive. Most people would assume this is about Madeline proving she can find a partner. But you see deeper than that." "It's not that deep. She told me she was tired of being her family's cautionary tale, tired of being measured against standards she never agreed to. She brought me here to remind herself that there are people in the world who don't play those games." "And what did you get out of it?" "Don't tell me nothing. Everyone wants something." Lucas thought about that honestly. "I got reminded that caring about people is terrifying but worthwhile. I got pulled out of a safe, small life where nothing hurt because nothing mattered too much. And I got to meet someone who's brave enough to challenge her entire family's worldview because she refuses to shrink herself to fit their expectations." Robert's expression softened slightly. "You really do see her clearly." "I try to." "Catherine thinks you're going to break her heart." "Your wife might be right. I've got no guarantees, no promises of happily ever after. All I can offer is honesty and effort." "That's more than most men offer." Robert swirled his wine, watching the light play through the liquid. "When I married Catherine, her family thought she was insane. I had nothing. No money, no prospects, no pedigree. Just ambition and stubbornness. They gave us a year, maybe two, before reality set in and she came running back to the safety of old money. But she didn't. No, she chose to believe in what we were building instead of what everyone said we couldn't have. She chose me every day, even when it was hard. Especially when it was hard." Robert looked at Lucas directly. "That's what I need to know you're capable of. Choosing Madeline every day. Not because it's easy or convenient or socially advantageous, but because she matters more than your comfort." "I understand that." "Do you?" "Because my daughter has spent her entire adult life being chosen last. After careers, after social obligations, after more convenient options. She's learned to expect abandonment disguised as practical choices. If you're going to be with her, you need to break that pattern, consistently, without wavering." Lucas met Robert's gaze steadily. "I lost my wife 6 years ago, car accident. One minute we were planning our future, the next minute I was planning her funeral. I learned the hard way that nothing's guaranteed, that tomorrow isn't promised, and that the only thing you can control is whether you show up for people while you have the chance." Robert's expression shifted, surprise, then something like respect. "Madeline didn't mention that." "She didn't know until today. It's not something I share easily." Lucas paused. "But I'm telling you now because I need you to understand. I'm not doing this casually. I'm not experimenting with your daughter's emotions. I'm here because after 6 years of keeping everyone at arm's length, she made me want to try again. That's not nothing." Robert was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "No, that's definitely not nothing." Through the window, Lucas could see the family conversation on the terrace winding down. Madeline was standing now, gesturing as she spoke. Catherine had her hand over her mouth. Victoria was nodding. Richard looked uncomfortable but engaged. "I should get back out there," Robert said, standing. "But, Lucas, one more thing." "Yes?" "If you hurt my daughter, money won't protect you. Influence won't protect you. Nothing will protect you. Are we clear?" Lucas stood as well. "Crystal clear. But, Mr. Cross, if I hurt your daughter, I won't need protecting from you. I'll be too busy hating myself. Robert studied him for another moment, then nodded. Good answer. Come on, let's see what damage control is needed after whatever truth bomb Victoria just dropped. They returned to the terrace to find the atmosphere had shifted. The family looked wrung out but somehow lighter, like people who just finished an intense therapy session. Madeline saw Lucas and immediately moved to his side, her hand finding his. You okay? He asked quietly. I told them everything. About the company, about the acquisition offers, about feeling like I've spent my whole life trying to earn approval for achievements they don't understand. Her voice was raw but steady. Victoria backed me up. Richard actually apologized for some things he said yesterday. And Mother, I admitted that I've been projecting my own fears onto you, Catherine said, joining them. My own mother was miserable in her marriage, trapped by convention and expectation. I swore I'd never let my daughters fall into that trap. But somewhere along the way, I started pushing you toward a different kind of trap. The one where you're so independent you forget how to let anyone in. Madeline's eyes were wet. Thank you for saying that. I should have said it years ago. Catherine turned to Lucas. I owe you an apology as well. I've been testing you since you arrived, looking for flaws, waiting for you to reveal ulterior motives. That wasn't fair. You were protecting your daughter, Lucas said. I can't fault that. Perhaps. But there's a difference between protection and sabotage. I was veering toward the latter. Catherine's smile was tentative but genuine. You defended Madeline last night when her own family was tearing her down. That took courage and integrity. I'm sorry I didn't recognize that sooner. Before Lucas could respond, a staff member appeared to announce that dinner was ready. The family moved inside to a dining room that somehow felt less formal than the night before, despite the identical setting. Maybe it was the lighting, or maybe it was just that everyone was too emotionally exhausted for more performance. Dinner conversation was carefully neutral at first. Discussion of the vineyard, plans for tomorrow's activities, safe topics that wouldn't reignite yesterday's conflicts. But as courses came and went, something shifted. The family began actually talking to each other instead of at each other. Richard asked Madeline about a specific client challenge she'd mentioned, and actually listened to her explanation instead of offering unsolicited advice. Victoria shared a surprisingly honest story about her struggles adjusting to European society expectations. Patricia admitted that managing 3 children while maintaining perfect household standards was harder than it looked. Henri even contributed a few comments that suggested he had opinions beyond aristocratic boredom. Lucas watched it all unfold, contributing when appropriate, but mostly just observing this family, learning to interact differently. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments of tension, still undercurrents of old patterns trying to reassert themselves. But there was also something new, something that looked almost like authentic connection. After dinner, Catherine suggested after-dinner drinks in the conservatory, a glass-enclosed room filled with plants and comfortable seating. The family dispersed throughout the space, conversations flowing more naturally than they had all weekend. Lucas found himself cornered by Richard while Madeline was talking to her mother across the room. I need to say something, Richard began without preamble, and I need you to actually hear it instead of assuming I'm attacking you. I'm listening. Richard took a breath. I've spent my entire life being the responsible one, the one who took over father's business, who made the strategic marriage, who produced the grandchildren everyone expected. And I've resented Madeline for having the courage to do something different, for building her own thing instead of joining the family empire, for choosing independence over approval. Lucas waited, sensing there was more. But watching you defend her last night, watching her finally stand up to all of us, I realized something. I'm not actually resentful. I'm jealous. Richard's laugh was self-deprecating. She did what I was too afraid to do. She chose herself over our parents' expectations. And now she has something real, something built on her own terms, while I have something successful, but hollow. That's not nothing to admit, Lucas said quietly. No, it's not. Richard looked across the room at his wife, his children. I love Patricia. I love my kids. But sometimes I wonder who I would have become if I'd had Madeline's courage, if I'd chosen passion over practicality. It's not too late to make different choices, isn't it? I'm 46 years old with a wife, 3 children, and a position in father's company that affects hundreds of employees. The choices I make now have consequences for more than just me. Choices always have consequences, Lucas said. The question is whether you're willing to live with the consequences of never trying versus the consequences of attempting change. Richard studied him with an expression Lucas couldn't quite read. Madeline's lucky to have you, someone who challenges her thinking without trying to control her choices. I'm lucky to have her too. She reminds me that staying safe is just another way of giving up. Across the room, Victoria had joined Madeline and Catherine, and Lucas could see the three women talking with surprising animation. Whatever they were discussing had Madeline laughing, real laughter, not the polite version she'd offered at previous meals. "Can I ask you something?" Richard said, "and I need an honest answer." "Sure." "Do you think it's possible to love someone and still fundamentally not understand their world? To be supportive without fully grasping the pressures they face?" Lucas thought about Madeline's company, about acquisition offers in the hundreds of millions, about decisions that affected dozens of families. He thought about his shop, his 3 employees, his simple metrics of success. "Yeah," he said finally. "I think it's possible. I think understanding every detail of someone's world is less important than respecting that their world matters to them." Madeline could spend years explaining the intricacies of technology consulting, and I still wouldn't grasp it the way she does. But I can respect that it's important, support her when it's challenging, and celebrate with her when it succeeds. And that's enough? I don't know. Maybe some days it won't be. Maybe there'll be times when the gap feels too wide, when we're both frustrated by the other's inability to fully understand. But if we're committed to trying, to learning, to choosing each other even when it's hard, maybe that's enough. Richard nodded slowly. I hope you're right, for Madeline's sake and yours. The evening wound down naturally, people drifting off in pairs and small groups. Lucas and Madeline ended up on a balcony overlooking the vineyard, the night air cool and clear, stars visible in a way they never were in the city. Your family's intense, Lucas said, breaking a comfortable silence. That's diplomatic phrasing for completely insane. I was trying to be polite. Madeline laughed, leaning against the balcony railing. Thank you. For this weekend, for defending me, for helping me finally say things I've needed to say for years. You did the hard work. I just provided backup. You provided more than backup. You reminded me who I am when I'm not performing for approval. You showed me what it looks like when someone chooses you without calculating what they'll gain. She turned to face him. That's not small, Lucas. That's everything. Lucas pulled her closer, and they stood like that for a while, just being together without words or expectations. The vineyard stretched out below them in neat rows that caught moonlight, and somewhere in the house behind them, Madeline's family was having conversations they should have had years ago. Finally, Madeline spoke again. Tomorrow we leave. Go back to real life. To your shop and my company and all the practical challenges Patricia warned us about. Yeah. Are you scared? Terrified, Lucas admitted. This weekend was contained, controlled. Real life is messy and unpredictable and full of complications we haven't anticipated. So what do we do? Lucas thought about Robert's challenge, about choosing Madeline every day, even when it was hard. He thought about Victoria's question about compatible visions for the future. He thought about his own fear of losing someone who mattered. We try, he said simply. We communicate honestly, we adjust when needed, and we keep choosing each other until we can't anymore, or until it becomes so natural we forget there was ever a choice involved. That's terrifying and beautiful at the same time. Yeah, it is. Madeline was quiet for a moment. Then, Lucas, I need to tell you something about the acquisition offers for my company. Okay. I've been considering them seriously, not because I want to sell, but because the right offer could set up my employees for life, could give them stock options and security and opportunities they'd never have otherwise. But accepting would mean major changes, potentially relocating, definitely traveling more, possibly restructuring everything about how I work. Lucas's chest tightened, but he kept his voice steady. And you're telling me this because if we're going to try, really try, you need to know what you're signing up for. My life isn't going to get simpler. It's probably going to get more complicated, more demanding, more everything that makes relationship building difficult. Madeline, look at me. She turned, and in the moonlight he could see the fear in her eyes, fear that he'd walk away, that this would be too much, that she'd have to choose between her ambitions and the connection they were building. "I'm not asking you to shrink your life to fit mine," Lucas said. "I'm asking for honesty about what your life requires, and the chance to figure out how I fit into it. If that means you travel more, we'll handle it. If that means relocating, we'll discuss it. If that means sometimes your company needs you more than I do, I'll understand. What I won't do is ask you to compromise your success to make things easier for me." Madeline's breath caught. "You say that now, but when the reality hits, then we'll deal with reality together, making adjustments, having hard conversations, probably fighting sometimes. But, Madeline, I'd rather have complicated with you than simple without you." She kissed him then, desperate and grateful and full of hope that seemed too fragile to trust, but too strong to ignore. When they broke apart, she was crying. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered. "How to let someone matter this much." "Me neither, but I think we figure it out together." They stayed on the balcony until the night air got too cold to ignore, then retreated inside to find the house quiet and dark, except for a few lights left on for safety. They climbed the stairs to the east wing, and Lucas walked Madeline to her door like he had the night before. "Tomorrow's going to be interesting," Madeline said. "Goodbyes with my family after everything that's come out this weekend. At least it'll be honest goodbyes." "True." She paused with her hand on the doorknob. "Lucas, no matter what happens after this, with the acquisition, with us, with any of it, thank you for this weekend, for seeing me, for standing with me, for reminding me that I'm enough exactly as I am. You are enough. You've always been enough. Your family just needed someone to point it out." Madeline smiled through tears. "Good night, Lucas." "Good night, Madeline." Lucas lay in the blue room for the second night, but this time sleep came easier. Tomorrow they'd leave the estate, return to their separate lives, and begin the real work of figuring out if what they'd built this weekend could survive outside the pressure cooker of family drama. It was terrifying. It was uncertain. It was worth trying. And as Lucas drifted off, his last conscious thought was that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was choose hope over fear, even when fear seemed safer. Especially when fear seemed safer. Because safe didn't mean alive. And for the first time in 6 years, Lucas felt truly alive. Morning came with this kind of golden light that made everything look softer than it was. Lucas woke early, showered, and packed his duffel bag with the clothes Madeline had provided and the few personal items he'd brought. The blue room looked exactly as it had when he'd first arrived. Elegant, expensive, completely unchanged by his presence. But Lucas himself felt different, like something fundamental had shifted in ways he was only beginning to understand. He found Madeline already downstairs, sitting at the kitchen counter with coffee and what looked like untouched pastries. She was dressed for travel in dark jeans and a soft sweater, her hair pulled back, her face thoughtful. "Morning," Lucas said, pouring himself coffee. "You sleep?" "Some. Mostly I've been thinking." "About?" "Everything. This weekend, what happens next, how we actually make this work in the real world." She looked at him, and Lucas saw the vulnerability she usually kept hidden. "I'm scared, Lucas." He settled onto the stool beside her. "Me too." "Really? Because you seem remarkably calm for someone about to try maintaining a relationship across fundamentally different lifestyles." "I'm not calm. I'm just better at hiding panic than you are." Lucas took a sip of coffee. "But being scared doesn't mean we shouldn't try. It just means we're taking this seriously." Before Madeline could respond, Catherine appeared in the doorway, looking surprisingly informal in slacks and a cardigan. "Good morning. I thought I heard voices. Did you both sleep well?" "Well enough," Madeline said. "Is everyone else up?" "Your father's in his study finishing some calls. Richard and Patricia are getting the children ready. Victoria and Henri are still sleeping, though that's hardly surprising given how late they stayed up talking." Catherine poured herself coffee and joined them at the counter. "I wanted to catch you both before the chaos of departure. I have something to say, and I'd prefer to say it without an audience." Lucas and Madeline exchanged glances. Catherine took a breath, and when she spoke, her voice was softer than Lucas had heard all weekend. "Madeline, I've been a terrible mother in many ways, not intentionally, but that doesn't matter. Intention doesn't erase impact. Mother, please let me finish. Catherine's hands wrapped around her coffee cup like she needed the warmth. I spent so many years trying to protect you from my mistakes that I created new mistakes entirely. I pushed you toward independence because I was terrified you'd end up trapped like my mother was. But I pushed so hard that you learned to expect abandonment instead of support. That was wrong. Madeline's eyes were already wet. And Lucas, Catherine turned to him, I tested you because I've watched too many people use my daughter for their own advancement. I've seen her kindness exploited, her success leveraged, her loneliness weaponized. I was protecting her the only way I knew how, by assuming the worst about everyone who got close to her. I understand that impulse, Lucas said quietly. Perhaps, but understanding doesn't make it right. You defended my daughter when her own family was criticizing her. You saw her value when we were questioning it, and you did it without expectation of reward or advancement. That's rare, Lucas. That's precious. And I almost destroyed it with my cynicism. Catherine's voice broke slightly. I'm sorry, to both of you. You deserved better from me, and I failed you. Madeline stood and moved to her mother, embracing her in a way that looked awkward at first, like people out of practice with physical affection, but then settled into something real. Catherine held her daughter and cried quietly. Years of missed connection and misunderstood intentions finally acknowledged. Lucas looked away, giving them privacy, focusing on his coffee until he heard Catherine speak again. You're good for her, Lucas. Don't let our family's dysfunction convince you otherwise. I'll try not to, Lucas said. The moment was interrupted by the arrival of Robert, followed shortly by Richard and his family, then finally Victoria and Henri looking rumpled but oddly content. Breakfast became a production, Catherine coordinating staff to prepare everyone's preferences, children chattering about the drive home, adults making plans to stay in better touch. It was normal in a way the weekend hadn't been. Just a family sharing a meal with all the mundane chaos that implied. And somehow that felt more significant than any of the dramatic confrontations that had preceded it. After breakfast, as people began loading cars and making final preparations to leave, Robert pulled Lucas aside one more time. Walk with me, Robert said, and it wasn't a request. They ended up in the vineyard, walking between rows of vines heavy with grapes, nearly ready for harvest. The morning air was cool, the earth beneath their feet still damp with dew. My daughter's going to accept one of those acquisition offers, Robert said without preamble. Maybe not immediately, but within the year. The numbers are too good, and the opportunities for her employees are too significant for her to refuse on principle alone. Lucas had suspected as much. And you're telling me this because? Because when she does, her life is going to change dramatically. More travel, more responsibility, more pressure than she's ever faced. She's going to need someone who can handle that without feeling diminished by her success or resentful of her time. And you're not sure I'm that person. I'm not sure anyone is that person, Robert corrected, but I'm hoping you'll try to be. They walked in silence for a moment, Lucas processing the weight of what Robert was really saying, that the challenges ahead were bigger than either of them had fully acknowledged, that loving someone meant supporting their growth, even when it complicated your own life beyond recognition. Mr. Cross, I can't promise I'll always handle it perfectly. I can't promise I won't sometimes feel lost in her world or frustrated by circumstances I don't control. But I can promise I'll keep trying, keep showing up, keep choosing her even when it's hard. Robert nodded slowly. That's all any of us can do. Show up and keep trying. He paused, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. This is my direct line. Not my office, not my assistant. Me. If you ever need advice, support, or just someone who understands what it's like to love a woman who's too ambitious for her own good, call. Lucas took the card, surprised by the gesture. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. I'm going to be checking in on you both, making sure you're treating my daughter well, and that she's treating you well. Consider yourself permanently on notice. Lucas couldn't help but smile. Fair enough. They walked back to the house to find everyone gathered in the circular driveway, cars loaded, goodbyes beginning. Lucas watched as the Cross family embraced, still slightly awkward, still learning how to show affection without performance, but genuinely trying. Victoria hugged Madeline tightly. Call me. Not for family obligations, but because you want to talk. I'm going to try being an actual sister instead of just competition. I'd like that, Madeline said. Richard approached Lucas, extending his hand. Take care of her, and if you need business advice, not that you will, given your philosophy on expansion, I'm available. I appreciate that. Patricia kissed Madeline's cheek. I was harsh yesterday. About relationships and compatibility and all my dire warnings. But I want you to know, I'm rooting for you both. Sometimes love is worth the complications. Catherine held Madeline's face in her hands. Be happy, sweetheart. Not perfect, not successful by anyone's standards but your own. Just happy. I'll try, Mom. It was the first time all weekend Madeline had called Catherine anything other than mother, and Lucas saw the impact register on Catherine's face. Surprise, then emotion, then something that looked like hope. Finally, there were no more delays. Lucas loaded their bags into Madeline's Mercedes, and they pulled away from the estate with everyone waving from the driveway. Lucas watched them get smaller in the side mirror until the gate closed and the Cross family disappeared from view. For the first hour of the drive, they were both quiet, processing, decompressing, adjusting to the shift from family drama back to just the two of them. The landscape changed from manicured vineyard to rolling hills to eventual freeway, and with each mile, the weekend began to feel both more and less real. So, Madeline said finally as they hit the highway. That happened. Yeah, that happened. My family actually apologized multiple times. I'm still not sure I didn't hallucinate the entire weekend. Lucas smiled. If you hallucinated it, I was in the same hallucination. Your father gave me his direct phone number. He what? Said I should call if I ever need advice about loving ambitious women. Madeline laughed, genuine and surprised. That's possibly the most emotional thing my father's ever done. He doesn't give out his direct line to anyone. Guess I made an impression. You made more than an impression. You walked into my family's dysfunction and somehow made everyone see themselves more clearly. That's not nothing, Lucas. I just said what needed saying. You did the hard work of actually changing the dynamic. They fell quiet again, but it was comfortable now, easy. Like people who'd been through something significant together and come out stronger for it. As they got closer to the city, Madeline's phone started buzzing with increasing frequency. Emails, messages, the demands of a business that had continued operating while she was gone. Lucas watched her check notifications at stoplights, saw the shift in her expression as she mentally transitioned back to CEO mode. Welcome back to reality, he said. Yeah. Madeline set her phone down with visible effort. I have a board meeting on Tuesday. They want updates on the acquisition discussions, and I have 3 client calls tomorrow that I can't postpone. And I have a transmission rebuild that was supposed to be done Friday, and an inspection that'll take most of tomorrow. Lucas looked at her. This is what real life looks like. The complicated part Patricia warned us about. Are you ready for it? No, but I'm willing to try anyway. Madeline pulled up in front of Lucas's apartment, a modest building in a working-class neighborhood that was probably 15 miles from her place, but felt like a different world. She put the car in park and turned to face him. Lucas, I need to tell you something about the acquisition. I'm listening. The leading offer is from a firm based in Seattle. If I accept, there's a strong possibility I'd need to relocate, at least part-time, maybe permanently, depending on how integration goes. The words landed like a physical blow, but Lucas kept his expression neutral. Okay. Okay. That's all you have to say. What do you want me to say? That I'll ask you not to take the opportunity? That I'll guilt you into choosing our relationship over your career? Because I won't do that, Madeline. I can't be the reason you don't reach for something you've worked your entire life to achieve. Madeline's eyes were wet. But what does that mean for us? Lucas took her hand. It means we have a decision to make. Both of us. You need to decide if the acquisition is worth the changes it'll require. And I need to decide if I'm willing to build a relationship that might involve distance, travel, and a lot more complexity than either of us anticipated. And if we decide differently, if I want to take the offer and you can't handle long distance, then we'll have been honest with each other about our limitations, and we'll part as people who tried their best instead of people who resented each other for incompatible choices. Lucas squeezed her hand. But Madeline, we're not there yet. We don't even know if you're taking the offer. We don't know what the terms would be, what flexibility exists, what creative solutions we might find. So let's not borrow problems from a future that hasn't happened yet. You're being remarkably rational about this. I'm terrified, Lucas admitted. But I'm also clear on one thing. I won't be the reason you make yourself smaller. If we can't make this work with you being fully yourself, pursuing your ambitions without compromise, then it's not the right relationship anyway. Madeline unbuckled her seatbelt and leaned across the console to kiss him, soft and grateful, and tinged with sadness for complications neither of them had fully anticipated. When she pulled back, she was crying. I don't want to lose this, lose you. Then don't. Let's figure it out, together. One honest conversation at a time. Lucas grabbed his duffel bag from the back seat, then paused before getting out. Hey, Madeline. Yeah? This weekend meant something. To me, to your family, to whatever we're building. Don't let the fear of future complications erase that. Don't let practical concerns convince you that what we have isn't worth protecting. How do I do that? How do I balance everything? Same way you built a $42 million company while your family doubted you. Same way you survived 5 years of family gatherings alone. Same way you walked into my shop and asked a stranger for help. Lucas smiled. You take it one day at a time, you stay honest about what you need, and you trust that people who care about you will show up when it matters. Madeline nodded, wiping her eyes. Call me tomorrow? Count on it. Lucas watched her drive away, then climbed the stairs to his apartment. The space felt smaller than he remembered, quieter, filled with evidence of a life that had been perfectly sufficient until he'd met someone who made him want more. He unpacked, did laundry, checked messages from his shop. Tony had texted that the transmission rebuild was mostly done, but had hit a snag with a specialty part. Marcus wanted to know if they should bid on a fleet maintenance contract that seemed too good to be true. Jenny had sent photos of her wedding dress with about 15 heart emojis. Normal life. Simple problems. The world he'd built carefully and defended fiercely. But now it felt different. Not inadequate exactly, but incomplete. Like he'd glimpsed something larger and couldn't quite settle back into the smaller space he'd been occupying. Lucas spent the evening responding to work messages, ordering the specialty part Tony needed, advising Marcus to get more details on the fleet contract before committing. He made dinner, nothing fancy, just pasta and vegetables, and ate while watching a game he didn't really care about. His phone buzzed around 9. Madeline. I miss you already. Is that pathetic? Lucas. If it is, we're both pathetic. I miss you too. Madeline. Board meeting prep is making me want to throw my laptop out the window. Lucas. Don't. Laptops are expensive. Madeline. Practical as always. Lucas. One of us has to be. Madeline. Lucas? Thank you. For this weekend, for everything, for making me believe this is possible. Lucas. It is possible. We just have to keep believing it. They texted back and forth for another hour. Nothing profound, just small updates about their evenings, observations about returning to normal life, the kind of mundane sharing that actually builds connection. Finally, Madeline said she needed to sleep, and Lucas let her go even though he wanted to keep talking. The next 2 weeks fell into a pattern. Lucas worked at the shop, handling the daily grind of repairs and customer service and equipment maintenance. Madeline navigated board meetings, acquisition negotiations, and the complex dance of potentially selling a company she'd built from nothing. They talked every night, sometimes for hours, sometimes just brief check-ins, and saw each other when they could steal time from their competing demands. It wasn't perfect. There were missed calls because one of them was dealing with an emergency. There were conversations cut short by obligations neither could postpone. There were nights when Lucas fell asleep alone, wondering if they were kidding themselves about making this work. But there were also moments of unexpected connection. Madeline showing up at the shop unannounced with coffee and pastries because she had a gap between meetings. Lucas driving to her office late one night when she texted that she was overwhelmed and needed someone to remind her why she was doing this. Video calls where they just existed together while doing separate work, her reviewing contracts, him doing paperwork, connected by screens but still somehow together. 3 weeks after the vineyard weekend, Lucas's phone rang at 7 in the morning. It was Madeline, and she sounded breathless. I accepted the offer, she said without preamble. The Seattle firm. They agreed to let me keep my team intact, provide stock options for all employees, and give me 18 months to transition instead of the 6 months they originally proposed. Lucas sat up in bed, his heart pounding. That's amazing. Congratulations. The 18-month timeline means I won't have to relocate immediately. I can work remotely for most of it, travel as needed, but maintain my base here. Which means, she paused, which means we have time to figure this out, to see if we can build something sustainable before geography becomes the main challenge. Lucas closed his eyes, relief flooding through him. 18 months. That's real time. It is. But Lucas, it also means I'm going to be busier than ever. More travel, more pressure, more everything we worried about. Are you sure you can handle that? I'm sure I want to try. The rest we'll figure out as we go. Madeline was quiet for a moment. Then, I told the board about you. Not everything, but enough. I said I had personal commitments that were important to me, and any relocation would need to account for those commitments. What did they say? They said everyone has personal considerations, and they'd work with me to find solutions. Lucas, I claimed you. In front of people who control my professional future, I said you matter enough to factor into major life decisions. Lucas's throat was tight. That's terrifying for you. Completely, but also liberating. I'm tired of pretending my personal life doesn't exist or doesn't matter. I'm tired of being just a CEO with no life outside the company. You helped me see that I'm allowed to want both. You are allowed to want both. You've always been allowed. They talked for another hour about logistics, about timeline, about what the next 18 months might look like as they figured out how to build a relationship alongside her massive career transition. It was complicated and uncertain and more than a little scary. It was also real, honest, built on foundation of choosing each other even when it was hard. Over the next 6 months, Lucas learned what it actually meant to date someone operating at Madeline's level. He learned about last-minute flight changes and conference calls that ran hours over schedule. He learned about the stress of managing 67 employees through major organizational change and the weight of decisions that affected dozens of families. He learned patience and flexibility and the art of being supportive without being a doormat. Madeline learned about the quiet satisfaction of building something with your hands. She started visiting the shop more regularly, watching Lucas work, asking questions about mechanical systems and problem-solving approaches. She learned that success didn't always mean growth, that sufficient could be its own form of ambition, that Lucas's simple life was actually deeply meaningful in ways her complex world sometimes wasn't. They fought sometimes, about priorities and time management and the inevitable friction of two independent people trying to build something together. But they also learned to fight fair, to say what they meant instead of what would hurt most, to listen instead of just waiting to respond, to repair instead of retreat. 8 months after the vineyard weekend, Madeline called Lucas with an idea that changed everything. What if we built something together, she said. Not a romantic gesture or a compromise to make our relationship easier, but an actual business venture that combined what we both care about. Lucas was under a car at the shop, but he rolled out to give her his full attention. I'm listening. You help people who can't afford standard repair rates. You do good work for fair prices, and sometimes you do good work for no prices because that's who you are. But you're limited by capacity. 3 employees, 1 location, only so many hours in a day. True. What if we scaled that? Not by turning you into a corporate chain, but by creating a foundation that funded similar operations in different communities. Small shops owned by local mechanics who share your values, supported by a central organization that handles the business side so they can focus on the work. Lucas sat up, his mind racing. That's ambitious. It is, but it's also meaningful. Real help for people who need it, structured in a way that's sustainable. I'd run the foundation side, fundraising, organization, scaling strategies. You'd handle the technical side, vetting mechanics, establishing quality standards, mentoring shop owners. We'd be working together. We would, which means I'd see you more, even when I'm traveling for the acquisition transition. Foundation work can happen from anywhere. And Lucas, this solves something for me too. I've been trying to figure out what comes after the acquisition. What gives me the same satisfaction as building my first company? This could be it. Lucas thought about Mrs. Chen next door who'd brought him soup last week when he was working late. About the single mother who'd cried when he cut her repair bill in half because she couldn't afford his already fair price. About every person who'd ever needed help and couldn't find it because the system wasn't built for people without resources. Tell me more, he said. They spent the next 3 months building the foundation, filing paperwork, establishing governance structures, pitching potential donors. Madeline leveraged her business network while Lucas reached out to mechanics he trusted, shop owners who shared his philosophy, people who'd been doing this work quietly for years and deserved support. Robert contributed seed funding, not as a father trying to control his daughter's choices, but as an investor who recognized meaningful work. Catherine joined the board, bringing connections to philanthropic organizations. Richard helped with legal structures. Victoria, surprisingly, became their champion in European fundraising circles, telling their story to wealthy donors who'd never thought about auto repair as a social justice issue. The Cross family, transformed by one honest weekend, continued showing up for Madeline in ways they never had before. Not perfect, not without occasional backsliding into old patterns, but genuinely trying. 1 year after the Vineyard weekend, the foundation opened its first supported shop in a low-income neighborhood 2 hours north of the city. It was run by a former military mechanic who'd been struggling to keep her business afloat while maintaining her commitment to fair pricing. With foundation support, she hired 2 more employees and expanded her capacity to help people who desperately needed reliable transportation but couldn't afford dealership rates. Lucas and Madeline drove up for the opening together, and as they watched customers arrive, many of them people who'd been quoted impossible prices elsewhere, Lucas felt something shift inside him. This was what purpose looked like. Not just maintaining his small life, but expanding the impact of his values. Not changing who he was, but amplifying what he cared about. And he'd found it by choosing to care about someone whose world was bigger than his, whose ambitions challenged his comfort zone, whose presence in his life demanded that he grow. 2 weeks later, Madeline moved the last of her things into Lucas's apartment. Not because she was giving up her own place, she kept it as an office, an occasional retreat when she needed space, but because they'd decided that trying to maintain separate lives while building a future together was exhausting and unnecessary. Fair warning, Lucas said, as she hung clothes in his closet that now held designer blazers next to work shirts with oil stains. This place is small, really small compared to what you're used to. I know, but it's yours, which means it's becoming ours. Madeline turned to face him. Besides, I'm barely here anyway. Between foundation work and acquisition transition, I'm traveling 3 weeks out of 4. What matters is that when I come home, I'm coming home to you. Lucas pulled her close. How's the transition going? Complicated, but good. The Seattle team is talented, integration is mostly on schedule, and my employees are thriving with their stock options. Some are buying houses, planning retirements, sending kids to college. It's everything I hoped for when I accepted the offer. You did good, Madeline. We did good. I couldn't have navigated this without you keeping me grounded. They stood like that for a while, just being together in a small apartment that held everything that mattered. Not the expensive furniture or the designer clothes, but the connection they'd built through honest conversation and consistent choice. That evening, they had dinner with the Cross family at a restaurant in the city. Not the estate, not some formal occasion, just family getting together because they wanted to rather than because obligation demanded it. The conversation flowed easily, with laughter and genuine interest in each other's lives. Robert asked Lucas about the foundation's expansion plans. Catherine showed Madeline pictures from a charity event she'd attended, actually wanting her daughter's opinion instead of just reporting accomplishments. Richard and Patricia talked about their marriage counseling with surprising openness. Victoria announced she and Henri were separating amicably, and while it was sad, there was also relief in her voice. The relief of finally admitting something wasn't working and choosing authenticity over appearance. As Lucas watched the Cross family interact, he marveled at how much had changed since that first hostile dinner. They still had sharp edges, still challenged each other, still carried old wounds that surfaced sometimes. But they'd learned to see each other as people instead of roles, to value authenticity over performance, to choose connection over competition. It wasn't perfect. It probably never would be, but it was real. After dinner, Lucas and Madeline walked along the waterfront, the city lights reflecting on dark water, the night air cool but not uncomfortable. "I've been thinking," Madeline said, "about what success actually means." "Yeah?" "For years, I defined it by revenue numbers and company growth and proving I could build something impressive without family help. But now," she paused, gathering her thoughts. "Now, success feels different. It's the foundation helping people. It's you and me figuring out how to build a life together despite ridiculous complications. It's my family actually seeing me. It's waking up and feeling like my life has meaning beyond professional achievement." Lucas stopped walking, turning to face her. "You know what I think success is?" "What?" "It's showing up when you have nothing to gain. It's choosing people over profit. It's building something that matters even when it's hard. It's everything you've been doing since you walked into my shop and asked for help." Madeline's eyes were bright. "You changed my life, Lucas. You know that, right? You helped me remember who I was before I turned myself into just a CEO. You defended me when my own family was tearing me down. You believed in me when I'd forgotten how to believe in myself. You changed my life too. You pulled me out of a safe existence where nothing hurt because nothing mattered too much. You reminded me that caring about people is worth the risk. You showed me that my values could have impact beyond my small world." They kissed under the city lights, two people from fundamentally different worlds who'd somehow built a bridge between them, not by compromising who they were, but by choosing each other consistently and honestly. 3 years after that first weekend at the vineyard, the foundation supported 23 shops across 5 states. Thousands of people had received fair-priced repairs, hundreds of families had reliable transportation, dozens of mechanics had sustainable businesses doing meaningful work. Lucas still ran his original shop, though now with 5 employees instead of 3. He spent half his time working on cars and half his time mentoring other shop owners, sharing the philosophy that had made his business successful and meaningful. Madeline had completed the acquisition transition and now split her time between foundation work and consulting for companies that wanted to scale with integrity. She traveled less than she had during the transition, but still more than Lucas would ideally prefer. They'd learned to handle it. Long phone calls, creative video dates, reunion weekends that felt like small celebrations. It wasn't always easy. There were still fights about priorities and misunderstandings about expectations. There were still moments when the differences in their lifestyles created friction neither could immediately resolve. But they'd built something real, something based on choosing each other every day, on honest communication even when it was uncomfortable, on respecting each other's ambitions while protecting their connection. One evening, as they sat on the small balcony of what was now officially their apartment, Madeline turned to Lucas with a question she'd been carrying for weeks. "Do you ever regret it? Saying yes when I asked you to pretend to be my boyfriend? Getting involved in my family's chaos? Taking on all the complications that came with caring about me?" Lucas thought about that first day in his shop. Madeline walking in wearing expensive clothes and carrying desperate hope. He thought about the vineyard weekend that had changed both their lives. He thought about every choice they'd made since then to keep choosing each other. "Not once," he said honestly, "not even on the hardest days, because Madeline, you helped me understand something important." "What's that?" "That the greatest wealth in the world isn't money or status or professional success. It's showing up for people when you have nothing to gain. It's choosing authenticity over performance. It's building something meaningful even when it's complicated and scary and uncertain." Madeline leaned against him, and they sat like that as the sun set over the city. Two people who'd started as strangers, become allies, and eventually built something that looked remarkably like love. Not the easy kind. Not the kind that made logical sense to people who measured compatibility by shared tax brackets. But the kind that was built on respect, honesty, and the daily choice to keep showing up even when it was hard. "Lucas," Madeline said quietly, "I love you. I should have said it months ago, but I was scared it would change things or add pressure or make everything more complicated." Lucas smiled. "I love you too. And you're right. It does make things more complicated. Love always does. But it also makes everything worthwhile." They kissed as the city lights began to flicker on around them. Two people who'd proven that different worlds could coexist when built on foundation of genuine care and consistent choice. Years later, when people asked Madeline about her success, about the company she'd built and sold, about the foundation changing lives across the country, about the partnership that defied conventional wisdom about compatible relationships, she always gave the same answer. The greatest wealth in the world, she'd say, is showing up when you have nothing to gain. Everything else is just details. And Lucas, standing beside her, not behind her, not in front of her, but beside her as an equal partner in a life they'd built together, would smile and add, "Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is choose hope over fear, even when fear seems safer, especially when fear seems safer." They'd learned that lesson together in a vineyard 3 hours north of the city, during a weekend that was supposed to be performance but became transformation. And they'd been living that lesson ever since, one honest conversation at a time, one choice at a time, one moment of showing up for each other even when it was hard. It wasn't perfect. It was better. It was real. And in the end, that was all that mattered. The Cross family still gathered annually at the estate, but now the gatherings felt different, less like battlefields, more like reunions. Robert had stepped back from daily company operations, spending more time with Catherine, traveling to places they'd always meant to visit. Richard and Patricia had renewed their marriage vows after working through issues they'd ignored for years. Victoria had found happiness with someone who valued her for herself rather than her connections. The children were growing up watching adults choose authenticity over appearance, connection over competition. And at the center of it all was the lesson Lucas had taught them that first weekend, that sometimes the person who changes everything is the one who simply shows up and tells the truth, who sees value where others see inadequacy, who chooses faith over fear. Lucas never became wealthy by conventional standards. He never expanded his shop beyond what felt personally meaningful. He never changed his fundamental philosophy that sufficient was its own form of success. But he built a life of profound richness, deep relationships, meaningful work, the satisfaction of knowing he'd help people when they needed it most. He built a partnership with someone extraordinary, not by trying to match her accomplishments, but by supporting her ambitions while maintaining his own integrity. And he built a legacy that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with the lives he'd touched. The customers who got fair treatment, the mechanics he'd mentored, the families who had reliable transportation because someone believed their needs mattered. The foundation Lucas and Madeline built together continued expanding, but always with the core principle that had started it, that everyone deserves help, that kindness is a strategy, not a weakness, that showing up matters more than calculating outcomes. On their 5th anniversary of that vineyard weekend, Lucas and Madeline returned to the Cross estate. The family was there, gathered not for formal dinner but for casual celebration. The children were older, the adults more relaxed, the whole atmosphere lighter than it had been years before. As sunset painted the vineyard in golden light, Robert raised his glass. "To Lucas," he said, "who walked into our world and refused to be impressed by anything except human decency, who saw my daughter clearly when we were too busy seeing our expectations, who taught us that wealth without integrity is just expensive emptiness. And to Madeline, Catherine added, who had the courage to demand better from us, to build something meaningful on her own terms, and to choose a partner who celebrated her strength instead of feeling threatened by it. To showing up," Victoria said, raising her glass. "To choosing faith over fear," Richard contributed. "To building lives that matter," Patricia offered. And Madeline, standing next to Lucas with his hand in hers, said the words that had become their shared truth, their guiding principle, their reminder of what they'd built together. To the greatest wealth in the world, showing up when you have nothing to gain. Everyone drank to that, and as the sun set over the vineyard where everything had changed 5 years earlier, Lucas thought about the journey that had brought them here. It had started with a desperate woman walking into a mechanic's shop asking for help. It had continued through a weekend of family confrontation and honest reckoning. It had developed through months and years of choosing each other despite practical complications. And it had resulted in this, a life built on authentic connection, meaningful work, and the daily practice of showing up for people who mattered. Not perfect, not simple, but profoundly, beautifully real. And as Lucas looked at Madeline, this woman who'd challenged him to care again, to risk again, to believe that good things were possible, he knew with absolute certainty that every complicated moment had been worth it. Because in the end, the greatest wealth in the world wasn't measured in dollars or status or professional achievement. It was measured in moments like this, standing beside someone you loved, surrounded by family that had learned to see clearly, building something that mattered to people who needed it. It was measured in showing up. And Lucas had learned from the very best that showing up consistently and honestly was the only investment that truly paid dividends. The sun completed its descent, and the vineyard lights came on. Practical illumination for practical purposes, nothing fancy, just enough to see by. It was perfect, just like them. Part 5. Lưu ý. Viết 60.000 năm. Từ liên kết liền mạch với các phần trước trong câu chuyện, pha hồi thoại tạo thành một câu chuyện liền mạch khi ghép lại. Mỗi phần liền mạch với phần trước, không giới thiệu lại câu chuyện ở đầu phần mới. Liên kết các phần của câu chuyện một cách liền mạch, sử dụng câu chuyện tiếp giữa các phần. Duy trì chủ đề, tránh ngắt quãng đột ngột, không sử dụng gạch đầu dòng hoặc tiêu đề phụ, phong cách kể chuyện Mỹ, Hoa Kỳ, giống văn giàu cảm xúc. Kể theo ngôi thứ 3, giữ đồ kịch tính không viết lan man. Phần 5 giải quyết hết vấn đề và kết thúc trọn vẹn câu chuyện. Lưu ý trả lời trong mục tin nhắn không nhảy sang document Mulgan năm 77. Part my morning came with the kind of golden light that made everything look softer than it was. Lucas woke early, showered, and packed his duffel bag with the clothes Madeline had provided and the few personal items he'd brought. The blue room looked exactly as it had when he'd first arrived. Elegant, expensive, completely unchanged by his presence. But Lucas himself felt different, like something fundamental had shifted in ways he was only beginning to understand. He found Madeline already downstairs sitting at the kitchen counter with coffee and what looked like untouched pastries. She was dressed for travel in dark jeans and a soft sweater, her hair pulled back, her face thoughtful. "Morning," Lucas said, pouring himself coffee. "You sleep?" "Some. Mostly I've been thinking." "About?" "Everything. This weekend, what happens next, how we actually make this work in the real world." She looked at him, and Lucas saw the vulnerability she usually kept hidden. "I'm scared, Lucas." He settled onto the stool beside her. "Me too." "Really? Because you seem remarkably calm for someone about to try maintaining a relationship across fundamentally different lifestyles." "I'm not calm. I'm just better at hiding panic than you are." Lucas took a sip of coffee. "But being scared doesn't mean we shouldn't try. It just means we're taking this seriously." Before Madeline could respond, Catherine appeared in the doorway, looking surprisingly informal in slacks and a cardigan. "Good morning. I thought I heard voices. Did you both sleep well?" "Well enough," Madeline said. "Is everyone else up?" "Your father's in his study finishing some calls. Richard and Patricia are getting the children ready. Victoria and Henri are still sleeping, though that's hardly surprising given how late they stayed up talking." Catherine poured herself coffee and joined them at the counter. "I wanted to catch you both before the chaos of departure. I have something to say, and I'd prefer to say it without an audience." Lucas and Madeline exchanged glances. Catherine took a breath, and when she spoke, her voice was softer than Lucas had heard all weekend. "Madeline, I've been a terrible mother in many ways. Not intentionally, but that doesn't matter. Intention doesn't erase impact. Mother, please, let me finish." Catherine's hands wrapped around her coffee cup like she needed the warmth. "I spent so many years trying to protect you from my mistakes that I created new mistakes entirely. I pushed you toward independence because I was terrified you'd end up trapped like my mother was. But I pushed so hard that you learned to expect abandonment instead of support. That was wrong." Madeline's eyes were already wet. "And Lucas," Catherine turned to him, "I tested you because I've watched too many people use my daughter for their own advancement. I've seen her kindness exploited, her success leveraged, her loneliness weaponized. I was protecting her the only way I knew how, by assuming the worst about everyone who got close to her." "I understand that impulse," Lucas said quietly. "Perhaps, but understanding doesn't make it right. You defended my daughter when her own family was criticizing her. You saw her value when we were questioning it, and you did it without expectation of reward or advancement. That's rare, Lucas. That's precious. And I almost destroyed it with my cynicism." Catherine's voice broke slightly. "I'm sorry to both of you. You deserved better from me, and I failed you." Madeline stood and moved to her mother, embracing her in a way that looked awkward at first, like people out of practice with physical affection, but then settled into something real. Catherine held her daughter and cried quietly, years of missed connection and misunderstood intentions finally acknowledged. Lucas looked away, giving them privacy, focusing on his coffee until he heard Catherine speak again. "You're good for her, Lucas. Don't let our family's dysfunction convince you otherwise." "I won't," Lucas said simply. The moment was interrupted by the arrival of Robert, followed shortly by Richard and his family, then finally Victoria and Henri looking rumpled but oddly content. Breakfast became a production, Catherine coordinating staff to prepare everyone's preferences, children chattering about the drive home, adults making plans to stay in better touch. It was normal in a way the weekend hadn't been. Just a family sharing a meal with all the mundane chaos that implied. And somehow that felt more significant than any of the dramatic confrontations that had preceded it. After breakfast, as people began loading cars and making final preparations to leave, Robert pulled Lucas aside one more time. "Walk with me," Robert said, and it wasn't a request. They ended up in the vineyard, walking between rows of vines heavy with grapes nearly ready for harvest. The morning air was cool, the earth beneath their feet still damp with dew. "My daughter's going to do remarkable things," Robert said without preamble. "With or without you. But I'm hoping it's with you." Lucas waited, sensing there was more coming. "I built an empire by being ruthless, by calculating every move, by treating relationships as transactions." Robert's voice was heavy with something that might have been regret. "It gave me wealth and power, and a family that performs for each other instead of connecting. Don't make my mistakes, Lucas. Don't let ambition or fear or practical concerns convince you that love is a luxury you can't afford." "I'm trying not to." "Try harder." Robert stopped walking and turned to face him directly. "Catherine and I almost lost each other a dozen times over the years. We survived because we kept choosing each other even when it would have been easier not to. That's what marriage is, 1,000 small choices to keep showing up even when it's hard." Lucas felt his throat tighten. "We're not married. Not yet. But if you're smart, you will be. And when that day comes, remember what I'm telling you now. My daughter doesn't need someone who matches her success or fits her world perfectly. She needs someone who sees her clearly and chooses her anyway. Can you be that person?" "I'm going to try." "Good." Robert reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. "This is my direct line. Not my office, not my assistant. Me. If you ever need advice, support, or just someone who understands what it's like to love a woman who's too stubborn for her own good, call." Lucas took the card, surprised by the gesture and the genuine warmth in Robert's voice. "Thank you, Mr. Cross." "Robert, we're past formalities." Robert extended his hand, and when Lucas shook it, the older man's grip was firm. "Take care of her, and let her take care of you. That's what partnership means." They walked back to the house to find everyone gathered in the circular driveway, cars loaded, goodbyes beginning. Lucas watched as the Cross family embraced, still slightly awkward, still learning how to show affection without performance, but genuinely trying. Victoria hugged Madeline tightly. "Call me. Not for family obligations, but because you want to talk. I'm going to try being an actual sister instead of just competition." "I'd like that," Madeline said, her voice thick with emotion. Richard approached Lucas, extending his hand. "Take care of her. And if you need anything, business advice, connections, or just someone who understands family dysfunction, I'm available." "I appreciate that." Patricia kissed Madeline's cheek. "I was harsh yesterday, about relationships and compatibility and all my dire warnings. But I want you to know, I'm rooting for you both. Sometimes love is worth the complications." Catherine held Madeline's face in her hands. "Be happy, sweetheart. Not perfect, not successful by anyone's standards, but your own. Just happy." "I'll try, Mom." It was the first time all weekend Madeline had called Catherine Mom instead of Mother, and Lucas saw the impact register on Catherine's face. Surprise, then emotion, then something that looked like hope. Finally, there were no more delays. Lucas loaded their bags into Madeline's Mercedes, and they pulled away from the estate with everyone waving from the driveway. Lucas watched them get smaller in the side mirror until the gate closed and the Cross family disappeared from view. For the first hour of the drive, they were both quiet, processing, decompressing, adjusting to the shift from family drama back to just the two of them. The landscape changed from manicured vineyard to rolling hills to eventual freeway, and with each mile, the weekend began to feel both more and less real. "So," Madeline said finally as they hit the highway, "that happened." "Yeah, that happened. My family actually apologized multiple times. I'm still not sure I didn't hallucinate the entire weekend." Lucas smiled. "If you hallucinated it, I was in the same hallucination. Your father gave me his direct phone number and told me to call him Robert." "He what?" Madeline nearly swerved. "My father doesn't give out his direct line to anyone, and he definitely doesn't let people use his first name." "Guess I made an impression." "You made more than an impression. You walked into my family's dysfunction and somehow made everyone see themselves more clearly. That's not nothing, Lucas. I just said what needed saying. You did the hard work of actually changing the dynamic." They fell quiet again, but it was comfortable now. Easy. Like people who'd been through something significant together and come out stronger for it. As they got closer to the city, Madeline's phone started buzzing with increasing frequency. Emails, messages, the demands of a business that had continued operating while she was gone. Lucas watched her check notifications at stoplights, saw the shift in her expression as she mentally transitioned back to CEO mode. "Welcome back to reality," he said gently. "Yeah." Madeline set her phone down with visible effort. "I have a board meeting on Tuesday. They want updates on the acquisition discussions, and I have 3 client calls tomorrow that I can't postpone. And I have a transmission rebuild that was supposed to be done Friday and an inspection that'll take most of tomorrow." Lucas looked at her. "This is what real life looks like. The complicated part Patricia warned us about. Are you ready for it?" "No, but I'm willing to try anyway." Madeline pulled up in front of Lucas's apartment, a modest building in a working-class neighborhood that was probably 15 miles from her place but felt like a different world. She put the car in park but didn't move to unbuckle her seatbelt. "Lucas, I need to tell you something about the acquisition." His chest tightened, but he kept his voice steady. "Okay. The leading offer is from a firm based in Seattle. If I accept, there's a strong possibility I'd need to relocate, at least part-time, maybe permanently, depending on how integration goes." The words landed like a physical blow, but Lucas forced himself to breathe through it. "Okay. Okay? That's all you have to say." "What do you want me to say? That I'll ask you not to take the opportunity? That I'll guilt you into choosing our relationship over your career? Because I won't do that, Madeline. I can't be the reason you don't reach for something you've worked your entire life to achieve." Madeline's eyes were wet. "But what does that mean for us?" Lucas took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "It means we have a decision to make. Both of us. You need to decide if the acquisition is worth the changes it'll require. And I need to decide if I'm willing to build a relationship that might involve distance, travel, and a lot more complexity than either of us anticipated. And if we decide differently, if I want to take the offer and you can't handle long distance, then we'll have been honest with each other about our limitations, and we'll part as people who tried their best instead of people who resented each other for incompatible choices." Lucas squeezed her hand. "But Madeline, we're not there yet. We don't even know if you're taking the offer. We don't know what the terms would be, what flexibility exists, what creative solutions we might find. So let's not borrow problems from a future that hasn't happened yet." "You're being remarkably rational about this." "I'm terrified," Lucas admitted. "But I'm also clear on one thing. I won't be the reason you make yourself smaller. If we can't make this work with you being fully yourself, pursuing your ambitions without compromise, then it's not the right relationship anyway." Madeline unbuckled her seatbelt and leaned across the console to kiss him, soft and grateful, and tinged with sadness for complications neither of them had fully anticipated. When she pulled back, she was crying. "I don't want to lose this. Lose you. Then don't. Let's figure it out, together, one honest conversation at a time." Lucas grabbed his duffel bag from the back seat, then paused before getting out. "Hey, Madeline." "Yeah?" "This weekend meant something. To me, to your family, to whatever we're building. Don't let the fear of future complications erase that. Don't let practical concerns convince you that what we have isn't worth protecting." How do I do that? How do I balance everything? Same way you built a company while your family doubted you. Same way you survived 5 years of family gatherings alone. Same way you walked into my shop and asked a stranger for help. Lucas smiled. You take it one day at a time, you stay honest about what you need, and you trust that people who care about you will show up when it matters. Madeline nodded, wiping her eyes. Call me tomorrow? Count on it. Lucas watched her drive away, then climbed the stairs to his apartment. The space felt smaller than he remembered, quieter, filled with evidence of a life that had been perfectly sufficient until he'd met someone who made him want more. Over the next 3 weeks, Lucas and Madeline settled into a rhythm that was equal parts exhilarating and exhausting. They talked every night, sometimes for hours, sometimes just brief check-ins. They saw each other when schedules aligned, which was less often than either wanted, but more often than seemed practical given their competing demands. Lucas learned what it meant to care about someone operating at Madeline's level. He learned about last-minute emergencies that required her immediate attention, about the weight of decisions that affected dozens of employees, about the constant pressure of proving herself in rooms full of people who doubted her. Madeline learned about the quiet satisfaction of work that was simple but meaningful. She started visiting the shop when she could, watching Lucas diagnose problems with mechanical systems, seeing the way customers trusted him implicitly because he'd earned that trust through consistent integrity. They fought sometimes, about time, about priorities, about the inevitable friction of two independent people trying to build something together. But they also learned to fight fair, to say what they meant, to listen without immediately defending, to repair the connection instead of retreating into safety. 4 weeks after the vineyard weekend, Madeline called Lucas at 8 in the morning. I need to see you, she said without preamble. Can you take a break? I have a customer coming in 30 minutes. After that then, please, Lucas, it's important. An hour later, Madeline walked into the shop carrying 2 coffees and wearing an expression Lucas couldn't quite read, nervous, excited, terrified, all at once. Let's talk in the office, Lucas said, leading her to the small room in the back that served as his administrative space. Madeline set down the coffees and took a breath. I told the Seattle firm no. Lucas went very still. What? I turned down the acquisition offer. All of them, actually. I'm keeping the company. Madeline, let me finish. She held up a hand. I turned them down because I realized something. I built this company because I wanted to prove I could do it on my own, that I didn't need my family's help or approval. And I did prove that. The acquisition offers proved it. But accepting them would have been about proving something else, that I could play in the big leagues, that I could compete at their level, that I was as ambitious as everyone always said I should be. Lucas waited, sensing she needed to get this all out. But here's the thing. I don't want to play in the big leagues. I don't want to relocate to Seattle or manage integration teams or spend the next 5 years of my life building someone else's vision of success. I want to keep running my company on my own terms, helping clients who need real solutions, employing people I actually know. Madeline's voice was shaking now. I want to build a life that has space for you in it, Lucas. Not as an afterthought or a complication I have to work around, but as a priority. Lucas's throat was tight. You turned down millions of dollars because of me? No, I turned down millions of dollars because of me. Because I finally figured out what success actually means to me. And it's not the number in a bank account or the prestige of being acquired by a major firm. It's doing work that matters, with people I care about, in a life that feels authentic instead of performed. But your employees, the stock options, the security will still be fine. Better than fine, actually. Because I'm profitable, growing sustainably, and capable of providing excellent salaries and benefits without selling the company. They'll still get opportunities, just different ones. Lucas stood and pulled her into his arms, feeling her shake against him, adrenaline and relief and residual fear all mixed together. That was a huge decision. Are you sure? I'm terrified, Madeline admitted into his shoulder. What if I regret it? What if I just gave up the opportunity of a lifetime because I was scared of change? What if... Hey. Lucas pulled back enough to look at her face. You didn't make this decision out of fear. You made it because you know yourself well enough to recognize what you actually want versus what you think you should want. That's courage, Madeline. That's you finally choosing yourself. She kissed him then, desperate and grateful and full of hope that felt too big to contain. When they broke apart, Lucas said, "So what happens now?" "Now I restructure some things to make the company more sustainable long term. Now I hire a COO, so I'm not doing everything myself. Now I build a business that can run efficiently without requiring me to work 60-hour weeks." Madeline smiled through tears. "Now I make space in my life for things that aren't work. Like you. Like us. Like figuring out what we're building together." I like the sound of that. "Yeah? Yeah." Lucas brushed a tear from her cheek. "But Madeline, I need you to promise me something." "What?" "Promise me that if you regret this decision, if you wake up 6 months from now wishing you'd taken the acquisition, you'll tell me. You won't suffer in silence or blame me or pretend everything's fine when it's not." "I promise." "But Lucas, I need the same promise from you. If this gets too complicated, if my world is too much, if you start feeling like you're compromising too much to make room for me, you'll tell me." "I promise." They stood like that for a long moment, two people who just made a choice that would change everything, both terrified and hopeful in equal measure. Over the next 6 months, Madeline restructured her company with the same intensity she'd brought to building it. She hired a talented COO who could handle day-to-day operations. She promoted key employees to leadership positions. She implemented systems that allowed the company to function efficiently without requiring her constant presence. It wasn't easy. There were growing pains and difficult conversations and moments when she questioned whether she'd made the right call. But every time doubt crept in, she'd remember the weekend at the vineyard, the family dinner where Lucas had defended her, the moment she'd realized she was tired of living for other people's definitions of success. Lucas, for his part, learned to make space in his life for someone else. He adjusted his schedule to accommodate Madeline's unpredictable demands. He learned to be supportive without being passive, to offer opinions without being controlling, to maintain his own identity while building something together. They had their first major fight 3 months in, when Lucas scheduled a fishing trip with friends the same weekend Madeline had a crisis with a major client. She accused him of not prioritizing her. He accused her of expecting him to be constantly available. They both said things they regretted, but they also repaired it. They apologized, explained their perspectives, negotiated a better system for coordinating schedules. They learned that fighting wasn't the end of a relationship. It was just part of figuring out how to be together. 8 months after the vineyard weekend, Madeline showed up at the shop with a proposal that surprised them both. "What if we built something together?" she said. Not a romantic gesture or a compromise to make our relationship easier, but an actual business venture that combined what we both care about. Lucas was under a car, but he rolled out to give her his full attention. "I'm listening. You help people who can't afford standard repair rates. You do good work for fair prices, and sometimes you do good work for no price at all because that's who you are. But you're limited by capacity. You can only help so many people." "True. What if we scaled that model? Not by turning you into a corporate chain, but by creating a foundation that funded similar operations in different communities. Small shops owned by local mechanics who share your values, supported by a central organization that handles the business side so they can focus on the work." Lucas sat up, his mind racing. "That's ambitious." "It is, but it's also meaningful. Real help for people who need it, structured in a way that's sustainable. I'd run the foundation side, fundraising, organization, scaling strategies. You'd handle the technical side, vetting mechanics, establishing quality standards, mentoring shop owners. We'd be working together." "We would, which means I'd see you more, even when I'm managing the company. Foundation work would give me something meaningful beyond just profitability. And Lucas, it solves something for both of us. You get to amplify your impact without changing who you are, and I get to build something that actually matters instead of just generating revenue." Lucas thought about Mrs. Chen next door who'd brought him soup when he worked late, about the single mother who'd cried when he cut her repair bill in half because she couldn't afford his already fair price, about every person who'd ever needed help and couldn't find it because the system wasn't built for people without resources. "Let's do it," he said. They spent the next 4 months building the foundation, filing paperwork, establishing governance structures, pitching potential donors. Madeline leveraged her business network while Lucas reached out to mechanics he trusted, shop owners who shared his philosophy, People who'd been doing this work quietly for years and deserved support. Robert contributed seed funding, not as a father trying to control his daughter's choices, but as an investor who recognized meaningful work. Catherine joined the board, bringing connections to philanthropic organizations. Richard helped with legal structures. Even Victoria became their champion, telling their story to donors who'd never thought about auto repair as a social justice issue. The Cross family, transformed by one honest weekend, continued showing up for Madeline in ways they never had before. Not perfect, not without occasional backsliding into old patterns, but genuinely trying. 1 year after the Vineyard weekend, the foundation opened its first supported shop in a low-income neighborhood 2 hours north. It was run by a former military mechanic who'd been struggling to keep her business afloat while maintaining her commitment to fair pricing. With foundation support, she hired 2 more employees and expanded her capacity to help people who desperately needed reliable transportation. Lucas and Madeline drove up for the opening together, and as they watched customers arrive, many of them people who'd been quoted impossible prices elsewhere, Lucas felt something profound shift inside him. This was what purpose looked like. Not just maintaining his small life, but expanding the impact of his values. Not changing who he was, but amplifying what he cared about. That evening, as they drove back to the city, Madeline reached across the console and took his hand. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For showing me that success doesn't have to mean bigger and more and constantly scaling. For teaching me that impact and integrity matter more than revenue. For helping me build a life that feels authentic instead of performed." Lucas squeezed her hand. "You did that yourself. I just reminded you it was possible." "No, you did more than that. You walked into my family's chaos and refused to let them make me small. You defended me when I'd forgotten how to defend myself. You chose me every single day, even when it was complicated and uncertain." Madeline's voice broke slightly. "You changed my life, Lucas. You changed mine too. You pulled me out of a safe existence where nothing hurt, because nothing mattered too much. You reminded me that caring about people is worth the risk." They drove in comfortable silence after that, 2 people who'd somehow built something real out of an arrangement that was supposed to be temporary. 2 weeks later, Madeline moved the last of her things into Lucas's apartment. Not because she was giving up her own place, she kept it as an office and occasional retreat, but because they decided that maintaining separate lives while building a future together was exhausting and unnecessary. "Fair warning," Lucas said as she hung designer blazers next to his work shirts. "This place is small compared to what you're used to." "I know, but it's yours, which means it's becoming ours." Madeline turned to face him. "Besides, I'm learning that enough is better than more. That small can be perfect when it's filled with the right things." Lucas pulled her close. "When did you get so wise?" "When I met a mechanic who taught me that the greatest wealth in the world is showing up when you have nothing to gain." They stood like that for a while, just being together in a small apartment that held everything that mattered. Not expensive furniture or designer clothes, but the connection they'd built through honest conversation and consistent choice. 3 years after that first weekend at the Vineyard, the foundation supported 23 shops across 5 states. Thousands of people had received fair-priced repairs. Hundreds of families had reliable transportation. Dozens of mechanics had sustainable businesses doing meaningful work. Lucas still ran his original shop, now with 5 employees instead of 3. He spent half his time working on cars and half his time mentoring other shop owners, sharing the philosophy that had made his business successful. Madeline's company continued thriving under her restructured leadership. She'd found the balance she'd been seeking, doing work she loved without sacrificing everything else. The foundation gave her purpose beyond profit, and Lucas gave her partnership beyond performance. One evening, 3 years to the day after Madeline had first walked into his shop, Lucas took her back to the Vineyard. The Cross family wasn't there. This trip was just for them. They walked through the rows of vines where Robert had given Lucas advice about choosing Madeline every day. They sat on the balcony where they'd first talked about building a future together. They stood in the garden where Catherine had apologized for years of misunderstanding. As the sun set over the vineyard, painting everything in gold and amber, Lucas turned to Madeline and took her hand. 3 years ago, you walked into my shop and asked me to pretend to be your boyfriend for one weekend. You said you needed someone real. Madeline smiled, tears already forming. I remember. I said yes because I recognized something in you that I knew too well. The loneliness of being surrounded by people who see what they want instead of who you are. I thought I was helping you survive a weekend with your family. Lucas reached into his pocket. But you ended up changing my entire life. He pulled out a small box and Madeline's breath caught. I'm not asking you to marry me because we've reached some arbitrary relationship milestone, or because it's what people expect, Lucas continued. I'm asking because you're the person I want to choose every day. Because you taught me that caring about someone is worth the risk. Because building a life with you, messy and complicated and beautifully imperfect, is the best thing I've ever done. He opened the box to reveal a simple ring, elegant but not ostentatious, meaningful without being showy. Exactly right for who they were. Madeline Cross, will you marry me? Madeline was crying now, full tears streaming down her face. Yes. God, yes. Of course, yes. Lucas slipped the ring on her finger, and they kissed as the sun completed its descent over the vineyard where everything had changed. When they broke apart, Madeline laughed through her tears. We're going to have to tell my family. They're going to lose their minds. Let them. We survived their scrutiny once. We can handle their excitement. My mother's going to want to plan an enormous wedding. Then we'll let her plan it and smile through all of it, because that's what family does. They show up for each other even when it's complicated. Madeline leaned against him, looking at the ring on her finger, at the vineyard bathed in twilight, at the future they were choosing together. Lucas, do you ever think about that first weekend? About how insane it was that I walked into your shop and asked a complete stranger to pretend to be my boyfriend? All the time. Do you think we would have found each other anyway? If I hadn't seen that video, if I hadn't been desperate enough to ask for help? Lucas thought about that seriously. I don't know, maybe not. But I'm glad we didn't have to find out. I'm glad you were brave enough to ask, and I'm glad I was brave enough to say yes, even knowing how complicated it would get. Especially knowing how complicated it would get. Because Madeline, the greatest things in life are complicated. They require work and compromise and showing up even when it's hard. But they're worth it. You're worth it. They stayed at the vineyard through the evening, calling their families with the news. Catherine cried and immediately started talking about venue options. Robert congratulated them gruffly, then told Lucas he was proud of him. Richard and Patricia offered to help with planning. Victoria screamed with excitement and demanded to be maid of honor. The Cross family, once so broken by performance and expectation, had learned to celebrate authentically, to show up for each other, to choose connection over competition. Lucas and Madeline were married 6 months later in a ceremony that perfectly balanced Catherine's desire for elegance with their desire for meaning. The venue was beautiful but not ostentatious. The guest list included family, friends, and mechanics from the Foundation's network. The vows were personal and honest, full of promises to keep choosing each other even when it was hard. When the officiant pronounced them married and Lucas kissed his wife for the first time, he thought about the journey that had brought them here. A desperate woman walking into a shop, a weekend of family confrontation, months of figuring out how to build something real, years of choosing each other consistently. At the reception, Robert gave a toast that brought everyone to tears. 3 years ago, my daughter brought home a mechanic, and I thought she'd lost her mind. A man with grease under his fingernails, no interest in wealth or status, completely unimpressed by everything we'd spent our lives building. Robert's voice was thick with emotion. I was wrong. Lucas didn't need to be impressed by what we'd built because he understood something we'd forgotten, that the greatest wealth in the world has nothing to do with money. It's about showing up when you have nothing to gain. It's about choosing people over profit. It's about building a life that matters. He raised his glass. To Lucas, who taught us to see clearly. To Madeline, who had the courage to demand better from all of us. And to the life they're building together. One honest choice at a time. Everyone drank to that. And as the evening unfolded, dancing and laughter and celebration, Lucas held his wife close and marveled at how far they'd come. Years later, when people asked about their success, about the Foundation changing lives across the country, about Madeline's company thriving under her balanced leadership, about a partnership that defied conventional wisdom, They always gave the same answer. The greatest wealth in the world, Madeline would say, is showing up when you have nothing to gain. And Lucas, standing beside her as an equal partner in a life they'd built together, would add, "Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is choose hope over fear, even when fear seems safer." They'd learned that lesson in a vineyard during a weekend that was supposed to be performance but became transformation. And they'd been living it ever since, one honest conversation at a time, one choice at a time, one moment of showing up for each other, even when it was hard. The foundation continued expanding, always maintaining the core principle that everyone deserves help, that kindness is strategy, not weakness, that showing up matters more than calculating outcomes. Lucas never became wealthy by conventional standards. He never expanded his shop beyond what felt personally meaningful. But he built a life of profound richness, deep relationships, meaningful work, the satisfaction of knowing he'd helped people when they needed it most. And Madeline found the balance she'd been seeking her entire life. Professional success that didn't require personal sacrifice, family relationships built on authenticity instead of performance, a partnership that celebrated her ambitions while grounding her in what truly mattered. 10 years after that first weekend at the vineyard, Lucas and Madeline returned for the Cross family's annual gathering. But this time, they brought someone new, their daughter, Emma, who was 7 years old and had her mother's determination and her father's integrity. As they walked through the vineyard together, Emma between them holding both their hands, Lucas thought about the journey that had brought them here, about a desperate request in a grease-stained shop, about honest conversations and consistent choices, about building something real out of what started as pretense. "Daddy," Emma said, "Grandpa Robert says you're a hero because you help people." Lucas smiled. "I'm not a hero, sweetheart. I just show up and do what needs doing." "Grandma Catherine says that's what heroes do. They show up." Madeline caught Lucas's eye over their daughter's head, and they shared a look of perfect understanding. The Cross family had changed, not perfectly, not completely, but meaningfully. They'd learned to value showing up over showing off, connection over competition, authenticity over performance. That evening, as the family gathered for dinner on the terrace where Lucas had once defended Madeline against their judgment, Robert stood to make a toast. 10 years ago, a mechanic walked into our lives and refused to be impressed by anything except human decency. He saw my daughter clearly when we were too busy seeing our expectations, and he taught us something we'd forgotten, that wealth without integrity is just expensive emptiness. Robert looked at Lucas and Madeline, at Emma sitting between them, at the life they'd built together. "You've built something remarkable, not just the foundation that's helped thousands of people, not just the company that thrives on balanced leadership, but a life that matters, a family that's real, a partnership built on showing up every single day." Everyone raised their glasses, and in that moment, surrounded by family that had learned to love authentically, Lucas felt the profound satisfaction of a life well lived. Not perfect, not simple, but real in every way that mattered. As the sun set over the vineyard one more time, Emma asked her parents the question she'd asked before. "Mommy, Daddy, tell me the story again, about how you met." Madeline looked at Lucas and he nodded. They told this story dozens of times, and it never got old. "Well," Madeline began, "a long time ago, Mommy needed help. She was going to visit her family, and she was scared they wouldn't understand her. So she walked into a shop and asked a stranger for help. And Daddy said yes," Emma finished, knowing the story by heart. "Daddy said yes," Lucas confirmed. "Not because he had to. Not because there was anything in it for him. But because someone needed help, and showing up for people who need help is what matters most." "Is that why you and Mommy help people with their cars?" Emma asked. "That's exactly why," Madeline said. "Because everyone deserves help. And the greatest wealth in the world isn't money or success or anything you can measure. It's showing up when you have nothing to gain." Emma considered this seriously, then nodded. "I want to show up for people too." Lucas pulled his daughter close, overwhelmed by the realization that they were raising someone who understood what truly mattered. "Then you will, sweetheart. Just like Mommy and Daddy do. Just like Grandma and Grandpa learned to do. Just like everyone can do when they choose hope over fear." As night fell over the vineyard and the Cross family continued their celebration, Lucas held his wife and daughter close and felt the profound gratitude of someone who'd been given a second chance at life, at love, at meaning. It had started with a desperate request in a grease-stained shop. It had continued through honest conversations and consistent choices. And it had resulted in this, a life built on authentic connection, meaningful work, and the daily practice of showing up for people who mattered. The greatest wealth in the world, indeed.